It all started one terribly cold and rainy day. The girl was sitting in her estate and called a doctor. She asked the man to tell her this news and say that it was all a lie. She couldn't believe that it was real. However, the doctor adjusted his glasses and turned to my lady and said that as the doctor who was responsible for the house of the Earl of Grint, he could say with certainty that these symptoms all pointed to one thing. He said that the beautiful lady who was sitting opposite him with blue hair was pregnant. Her name was Caitlin Green. And as soon as she heard this news, she was sincerely shocked. The girl stuttered and began to say that all this could not be true because she knew that she had her period after the day it all happened. Therefore, she absolutely could not understand how she could be pregnant. The doctor, hearing about this, was a little surprised and immediately asked how long these days had lasted for her. Caitlin thought about it but then said that usually they lasted about a week, but that time only 2 days. She immediately felt hopeful and asked if it was true that this meant that she could not be pregnant, since she believed that one close contact definitely could not lead to having a child. However, the doctor then replied that the bleeding was most likely due to the implantation of the baby in her body. And the proof of this was the fact that her usually regular period did not come that month. Then he decided to check her condition with another method. He gave the girl her favorite herring fillet, and as soon as the girl smelled its aroma, she immediately began to feel sick. The doctor quickly covered the dish with a lid so that she wouldn't vomit, and, smiling, said that first they had to tell the Count this news. Caitlin suddenly grabbed his hand and said that it was impossible to do this. The doctor was very surprised to hear about this, and immediately asked what she would like in that case. The girl thoughtfully asked if he could keep this whole fact a secret until she herself figured out what to do next and was ready to tell the Count. She immediately thought about the fact that if she, as their precious youngest daughter, were to be out of wedlock and also pregnant, then she would definitely be beaten half to death and kicked out of the family. Caitlin's hand suddenly began to shake violently. As soon as the doctor saw this, he immediately became worried about her. He understood that in such a state she definitely should not be nervous. Therefore, the man turned to her and asked her to calm down first. He came closer and, stroking her on the back, asked if she really thought that the Count could do something bad to her. The man tried to calm her down and said that of course this was not all planned, but since this child was from Lord Mura, he believed that there was nothing to worry about. He also added that her father probably knows how much she loves him, and he is sure that everything should have been fine. He also added that the most important thing in that situation was that they were already engaged and the rest was not so important. In fact, Arson Moore was Caitlin's fiancé, to whom she finally became engaged after 9 years of unrequited love. And as soon as the girl thought about this whole situation, she realized that since they were supposed to get married soon anyway, she could only think of it as a small incident. But the reason why Caitlin's head was empty and she wanted to cry all the time was because the child was not Lord Moore. She decided that this important fact should not be hidden from the doctor, so the man told him about it. Of course, upon hearing this, he was sincerely amazed. In fact, this incident happened a month and a week ago. She wrote a letter to her beloved Arson and talked about how much she loved him. She said that his smiling face was shining like an angel who had come down from heaven and his broad back was as big as the Pacific Ocean. However, at that moment there was some strange noise on the street. Because of this, Caitlin could not concentrate. She immediately went to the window to see who distracted her. She saw that there were several horses in the yard as well as servants. The girl immediately turned to her maid Amy and asked if she knew anything about this. The maid, who had just brought the mistress tea, replied that someone had come from the tavern and said that their young master had gotten so drunk that he had even fallen asleep. Caitlin was amazed when she heard this. She didn't understand why he always sang so much that he even lost consciousness. This was already irritating her, but Amy put down a tray of tea and sweets. The lady said that they were talking about sending a carriage to take him home, which was why there was so much fuss. The lady suddenly thought about it, and after that she asked if this wasn't the same night's party that was supposed to be grand. Amy thoughtfully said that it was indeed she, but then suddenly looking at the lady she saw a rather sly smile on her face. Caitlin, meanwhile, had already started to run away. The girl immediately followed her and asked where she was going at such an hour. But the lady was not going to answer this question. When some time had passed since then, the girl changed her clothes and went downstairs to go to the tavern. She was very happy. Several hours passed from that moment, and Caitlin finally arrived at the desired destination. She waved to the maid who accompanied her and asked her to tell father that she would return a little later. The girl also asked them not to worry because Lord Moore, as usual, would accompany her back, so she would be safe. After that, she went inside and seeing men who were sitting at the same table and talking heatedly about something, The girl decided to surprise them and quickly approached them and said hello. As soon as the knights heard someone's female voice, they immediately turned around and, seeing Lady Green, greeted her. They even offered her to sit down so that she wouldn't have to stand. And Arson, who saw his bride, was sincerely amazed. He didn't expect that she could come that evening. In fact, Caitlin thought otherwise. She was happy that she was able to sneak into this party and join the company. But she noticed that she managed to do it so easily only because she drank a little more than was necessary, and because of this, it was even difficult for her to stand on her feet. That evening, the groom accompanied her to the house. He told the girl that she was drunk. He asked her not to be stubborn, and he would take her calmly. Because the girl was really under the influence of alcohol, she immediately started to act up. Caitlin said that she would not go anywhere until he kissed her. But the man, when he returned from her, said that she should have waited until the wedding. Until that moment, he had no right to do anything. Caitlin was very disappointed because of this. She knew that she had to remain pure until marriage. But she did not understand why he could not at least give her a kiss. They had been dating for 2 years, and because of this time, they had not touched each other. She sighed heavily and said that, as he had already said, they were supposed to get married anyway, so she didn't understand what the problem was with just kissing her. Caitlin said that in fact she sometimes even doubted whether he loved her at all. She just wanted to make sure. The girl also added that she needed to know that it was true love before the wedding. Of course, Arson understood perfectly well that he had acted very ugly on his part. For some time, he looked away from her and thought about what to say. After that, sighing heavily, he replied that in fact he loved another woman. And as soon as Caitlin heard this, she couldn't believe it. She immediately asked again what he meant. The man replied that the wedding would not be a problem. However, until now, he really hoped that Caitlin would be able to understand that he would not be able to give her what she wanted. The girl was in a panic. She asked, "How is this possible? He always said that he liked her." And then she found out that he loved another woman altogether. Then he asked her for forgiveness and was about to leave. But Caitlin continued to hold his hand. She asked if he was really serious about all this and also wanted to know why he proposed to her at all if he didn't love her. The man answered, even though he looked into her eyes and said that she herself knew perfectly well that marriage is not always about love. Caitlin kept asking questions. She asked why he told me this right away instead of pretending he liked her. Did he feel sorry because she had been in love with him for years, and he just decided to do it? Tears began to appear in her eyes, and she asked if it could also be because he loved her, but not as much as she loved him. Arson took her by the hand and began to lead her towards the carriage, saying that it was too cold outside and she needed to go home already. But the girl was so angry that she even hit him on the hand and told him not to touch her. She could get there herself. After this, Caitlin turned around and began to run away from the man she loved with all her soul. In the end, she wanted Arson to stop her. However, he didn't do it. He just let her go. One cold winter night, he left her drunk and upset to walk the streets all alone. It was then that the girl finally admitted that Arson Moore had never even loved her, and that was why she allowed herself to cry. Of course, after some time, the girl realized that she just needed to go home that night no matter what. However, she ultimately did not do so. The next day after Caitlin learned the terrible news, she was riding in a carriage with her brother. He saw that she was thinking and immediately turned to her, but because she did not expect him to talk to her, the girl was scared. She asked him to never sneak up on her like that again, and she herself noticed the fact that pregnant women swell more easily due to hormonal changes. The guy asked her for forgiveness for scaring him, and also added that she always refused to go to the training ground, but he was surprised that this time she decided to go with him. After that, he suddenly smiled and asked if this really meant that she missed the price so much that she decided to come to him earlier. This fair-haired man was her brother Alexander Green, a girl who, from the moment she found out that he did not love her, began to hate her fiancé, so she said that this was not really the case. Then Caitlin explained that she decided that she should come at least once too, because she heard that all his sisters from the nightly company always come to support him. The man immediately ran up and hugged her, saying that Kate had grown up a lot and had come to support her older brother, which is why he was incredibly happy and grateful to her. Of course, at that moment the girl began to be tormented by a feeling of guilt, since she actually came there not only to support her brother, but she was pleased that he was happy. Meanwhile, they continued to drive further, and the girl decided to change the subject of the conversation. She asked if he knew what kind of person Sir Hurd was. Alexander, hearing about the captain, was a little surprised. He did not understand why the girl asked about this. However, she said that he was a good person. But at the thought of this man, a shiver immediately ran down his spine. When he asked why Caitlin suddenly decided to ask about it, she just asked the next question and wondered if he was also a good romantic partner. Her brother was horrified. He immediately asked what she was talking about, why she was interested in his captain as a partner. He immediately started asking his sister how she knew him and why she suddenly decided to ask such things. And he also asked if it was because Alexander said that Arson was not suitable for her as a partner. He immediately began to say in a sad voice that he had really made a mistake and would never say that again because it was all untrue. In fact, Caitlin only asked about this because this man was the father of her child. Some time passed from that moment. The girl was finally able to get rid of her brother, and she did not have to answer all these questions, so they continued their journey in silence. And when they arrived at the training ground, Alexander immediately pointed to her and said that she belonged to the First Order. Seeing her, Caitlin was very surprised because she had never been there and did not know that this place was so huge. But the man pointed in the other direction, saying that there was a special zone for spectators. He wanted to take her there, but before that, he also needed to go change his clothes and then start training. At that moment, the commander suddenly approached them and addressed Alexander Green in a rather stern voice. The man asked if he really had training that day, since he didn't know their schedule, so he decided to ask again. Alexander immediately greeted the commander. He bowed and said that he was glad to see him. The girl, hearing that her brother was addressing the commander, immediately turned around and looked right at him. Alexander, meanwhile, replied that they had no plans for training yet. He simply brought his sister to show her the surroundings and give her a short tour. The tall, dark-haired man who had a rather beautiful body structure was Theodore Hurt, and he was the father of Caitlin's future child. He was also a loyal commander of the Imperial Knights of the Spartan Empire. The girl, as soon as she looked at him, could not take her eyes off him for some time. He also looked at her for a while, but soon she looked away, and of course her brother noticed all this and became very wary. After a short silence, Theodore told Alexander to go and change his clothes and he could accompany Lady Green. Of course, as soon as the guy heard this, he was sincerely amazed and immediately said that he could accompany his sister himself, and the commander did not need to be distracted by this under any circumstances. Theodore then looked at him with an incredibly stern look and told him to go first and change his clothes. Now this moment was definitely not an option for conversation. Of course, even despite this, Alexander wanted to object to something, but his commander said that this was an order, not a request, and he was obliged to carry it out. At that moment, Caitlin felt incredibly sorry for her brother because she knew that he couldn't refuse. Since it was the commander's order, he simply had to go. After her brother had gone quite a long distance from Theodore, he suddenly smiled happily and told Miss Green that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. He became a completely different person. Even his face changed. The girl, adjusting her hair, said that they were absolutely right. They hadn't seen each other for a long time, after which she decided to get straight to the point. She told the man that she needed to tell him something, so she asked him if he had time for them to talk a little. Theodore, of course, would not have infected. He suggested that she simply go to another, less noisy place and there talk about what she wanted. In fact, a month ago, when the girl got very drunk and learned about that terrible news from her fiancé, she was walking down the street and heard the voice of a man who was standing right in front of her. This man turned out to be Theodore. He looked at Caitlin and asked if she hadn't sent her carriage away. The girl saw him and immediately recognized him. She asked if it was really Heard in order to double-check just in case. The man also knew the girl. He took off his jacket because he saw that she was cold and asked if she hadn't been with Arson all this time. Theodore already asked how the guy could leave the young lady alone. And in such a state, the girl then, holding back tears, asked the man not to mention this person. She explained that they no longer had any relationship, so she felt that it would be completely inappropriate to remember him. And Theodore, of course, upon hearing about this, was very surprised. Well, Caitlin then plucked up her courage and came closer to him and asked if he would like to sleep with her. Of course, after some time, Caitlin realized the fact that she was drunk. She still could not understand how she even dared to say such words to his face. She even kissed him then, although she had never done this with Arson more, and she didn't understand at all where she could have gotten the courage from. Now, when the girl sat opposite Theodore, she felt incredibly awkward and even ashamed to remember what happened that night. The man brought her to the room. He kissed her quite tenderly, but at the same time passionately, and also asked Caitlin if she would regret what she had done later. He also warned that if she didn't want to, she could tell him right now, and at any other time he didn't want to do anything that she might regret later. Caitlin then directly asked the man if he really didn't want to sleep with her, and for that reason asked all these unnecessary stupid questions in her opinion. Theodore then began to take off his shirt and replied that he simply had to ask her opinion himself. He certainly wouldn't regret it. Of course, Caitlin was pleased that he cared about her, But she never thought that everything could have turned out in such a way that she became pregnant from this man after one night. In fact, Theodore accompanied her to the gazebo, and he himself went to change clothes. As soon as he went inside, he immediately asked for forgiveness for being late. So when she looked at him, she was a little surprised because she didn't understand what kind of uniform he was wearing, because she thought he would change into everyday clothes. He came closer to the table and put a small box there. Caitlin immediately asked what it was because she was interested. But the man sitting down opposite her replied that he bought it thinking that she might like it and even be suitable. He had planned to give it to her earlier, but she had always avoided him. That's why it didn't work out. In fact, Kate never thought that she could get pregnant. So she would definitely continue to avoid this person, but unfortunately it didn't work out. Then Theodore told her to open it and look. As soon as Caitlin did this, she saw a small, beautiful, precious brooch. In fact, it was the last winter collection of Andreas, the most famous designer of the capital of Hyena. She immediately lit up with happiness and said that this thing was incredibly beautiful, and also thanked Theodore. In fact, the girl was pleasantly surprised because she had always heard that this thing was very difficult to get. She even thought that this was a sign that he liked her, and assumed that it would definitely be easier in her situation. As soon as Theodore heard that she liked her, she immediately said that it was a relief for him, after which he asked what exactly she wanted to say. Then the girl immediately remembered why she came and answered that she had several questions for him. With a stern look, Caitlin looked at him and said that she wondered when he was planning to get married. The man, hearing this, was very surprised and immediately asked in a trembling voice, "Why did she suddenly decide to ask such a thing?" Caitlin responded with a laugh about how he was already at that age when it was time for him to get married. She was sure that he had received marriage proposals, but it was surprising that he was still single. She suggested that perhaps he hadn't met anyone he liked or was simply so busy with his work that he hadn't even had time to meet anyone. Then suddenly you interrupted her and said that she definitely shouldn't worry about this. He doesn't date for the sake of marriage, so don't put pressure on others because of this. How did the man explain that he had the same opinion as the lady? He was against marriage, and as soon as Caitlin heard this, she could not contain her surprise. The nervous girl immediately laughed and asked when she had even managed to say that she was against the marriage. And at that moment, she suddenly remembered that after they had spent an intimate moment together, Theodore had turned to her and asked if she had met with Moore, with thoughts of marriage. He had heard Lady Green earlier talking to Rimuru about something like him kissing her and asking how it was that they hadn't had a single kiss in all that time. As soon as Caitlin heard this, she immediately yelled at her, asking when this had happened. After all, she didn't remember doing anything like this. The girl also added that she didn't know how much he had heard, but he was definitely wrong. She was against marriage. Of course, she wasn't against having some fun, but being tied up was the last thing she wanted in life. Caitlin explained to him that she thought that getting married at such an early age as hers was completely pointless and even stupid. How could she say that it was simply a difference in values, and it caused an argument between her and Moore? Theodore decided to clarify whether he understood everything correctly, and asked whether this really meant that it was Arson who was rushing her into marriage, and the lady, in turn, simply wanted a relationship. The girl immediately said that everything was exactly like that, although calling their connection a relationship was even funny to her. Then, in a very confident voice, she told Theodore that she was in favor of a calm, non-committal relationship like what happened to them that evening. How did she then declare that she absolutely and categorically did not cling to Sir Moore and asked if it was now clear to him? Only Caitlin remembered all this. That is, she became very ashamed. She realized that then she really said some stupid things while drunk. But after a short silence, Theodore smiled and asked her to go out. She would never find another person who could understand her and not oblige her to anything like him. He said that he had no intention of being a burden to the lady like Arson had been, and while waiting asked what she could say about this. Without giving the girl a chance to reconsider, he also added that if he wanted to choose someone to date, he would recommend himself. Caitlin certainly did not expect such a development of events. However, she said that she would definitely think about it, but at that moment she realized one simple truth. She should never lie, because it would definitely not end well. When the next day came and the maid brought Caitlin breakfast, she was again feeling nauseous all morning. She just couldn't eat it. So she asked Amy to take the thing away from her, or she would throw up again. The maid then replied that it was already the 4th day that the girl refused to eat. She explained that she needed to force herself to eat even if she didn't want to. Otherwise, it could only get worse. Caitlin, lying on the bed, replied that she didn't care. She really couldn't eat. If the maid was going to force feed her, then it would be better to just kill her than to do it. Amy was very excited. She told the lady that she could no longer hide her condition behind a fever forever. She could not raise the child alone, so it was unfair that she had to suffer on her own. So she carefully asked the girl if she thought she should meet Lord Hurt again and talk to him. Of course, Caitlin had thought about this before, but that evening she also asked the man if he didn't need an heir so that he could continue his line. But the man then calmly replied that he didn't need it at all. In fact, he wasn't from an old noble family, so he didn't see any difference in it. The man believed that his comfort was above all else, so of course he was not going to even think about the heirs. Caitlin immediately explained this thought to Emma, saying that she could not talk about pregnancy after he told her all this information right to her face. She also knew very well that she would be condemned and that they would start spreading dirty rumors about how she was unmarried and a noblewoman, and also pregnant. And it was especially obvious. After all, this noblewoman was the youngest daughter of a respected count's family. It was only a matter of time before the entire empire turned this into dirty gossip. Catherine then sat on the bed and turned to the maid and asked Amy what was wrong with her life. And besides, what was she supposed to do now? She didn't know then. The maid replied that the mistress should have been more careful, then nothing like this would have happened. But Caitlin screamed again, saying that she had always been careful, she was just a little drunk, but still conscious and absolutely sure that they had done everything right. Amy asked if the lady was confident in this, because apart from regular intake of tea, there was no absolutely accurate contraception. The girl, hearing about this, immediately looked at her angrily. She asked why her maid was also such a pessimist. After all, Lord Fernando, who was their doctor, had already scolded her, and that was enough for her. The girl grabbed her by the cheek and pulled quite hard. Amy immediately screamed that it hurt, but at that moment there was a knock on their room and the butler said that Lord Moore had come to see my lady. The butler said that when he told him about the lady's condition, he said that he would return later and asked what he needed to convey. Caitlin, hearing who exactly had come, was shocked. But in the end, she still agreed to meet with this man. And as soon as he came, she asked in a rude voice why he did this. The man looked at her with a very pitiful look. Caitlin knew perfectly well that she should have kicked him out, but in the end, she simply put on makeup before that to meet the guy who had been lying to her all this time and didn't even love her. Arson said that he was very worried because there was no news from the girl for a long time. Alex said that she was sick, and for this reason he hurried to her as quickly as possible. How the man looked at her and replied that she really did look a little bad, and asked if everything was okay with her. How exactly she felt. At that moment she thought that Arson really had no idea how exactly she felt, so she turned away from him and said that it no longer concerned him. The man, hearing about this, was very surprised. He immediately wanted to come closer to her and asked what she was talking about. But the girl openly ignored him. Because of this, he felt very sad. After a short silence, the man said that he was really sorry for that day because he did not want to hurt her. Caitlin then glanced at him and asked if he now understood that he was wrong. The man immediately said that he had no excuses. He had no right to do that. But he also said that he could promise that this would not be a problem for their wedding. He was even ready to swear by anything about this. Katie, hearing this, was ready to even laugh. She could not believe that he really said such nonsense. She asked how it was possible that he loved another but wanted to marry her, and asked if he really planned to date her behind Caitlin's back even after the wedding. Arson, meanwhile, seemed to kneel before the girl and said that it was not so. It was only he who loved her. After the wedding, no problems would arise for sure since there was no reciprocity between them. As soon as the girl heard this, she was shocked and immediately asked, "Does this really mean that he didn't even personally cross paths with her or communicate with her?" The man immediately said that everything was correct. There was no talk of any kind of relationship, so he looked her straight in the eye and said that he would definitely try to be a good husband for the girl. He also added that it was a little hard for him now because she was still like a younger sister to him, but he was sure that if he tried, he would succeed and he would be able to love her like a lady. Arson asked Kate to give him another chance and then he would definitely be able to live up to her expectations. The girl at that moment thought that she hated that it really tempted her. She didn't want to have such feelings at that moment. Well then, Caitlin touched her stomach and realized that she had no other choice, so she replied that they should just call off the wedding. Arson, hearing this, was sincerely amazed, since he had hoped for a completely different result, and with a trembling voice asked what she meant. He suddenly grabbed her hand and said that he was really wrong. And because of this, he asked her for forgiveness and hoped that she could forgive him. Kate was even a little worried. She asked what was wrong with him and also asked him to let go of her hand because he was squeezing it quite tightly. The man was completely emotional. He said that if the wedding was canceled, There was no chance that they would go back to the way things were before, and the thought of that was simply unbearable for him. He explained that he didn't love her romantically yet, but if he had to spend the rest of his life with someone, he always thought and believed that it should be Caitlin. He looked into her eyes and asked the girl to think about the time they knew each other, and asked who else he should have married if not her. He began to beg her, and really wanted her not to cancel their wedding and engagement. Arson looked at her with tearful eyes and hoped for a positive outcome. But Kate, meanwhile, sighed heavily and thought about the fact that she could never have imagined that the day could come when Arson would begin to beg her not to leave. Sometime. Caitlin did not answer him anything. She thought about it, but soon she told him to calm down first and finally let go of her hand, because it was unpleasant for her. Arson then said that he would definitely try harder from that moment on, and without thinking twice, he took the initiative into his own hands and kissed the girl right on the lips without even asking her about it. She was so shocked that for a while she didn't even resist. But soon, when her brain finally realized what had happened, she quickly pushed it away from herself. The girl started shouting loudly at him, asking what he was doing right now. Arson, in turn, was a little confused because he thought that this could only be to his advantage. He replied that she had told him that she needed assurance that his feelings were real, and that was precisely why he had done so. Arson asked if she didn't want this. Caitlin immediately began to tear out her lips. Tears appeared in her eyes. She was too emotional during pregnancy. The girl certainly wanted this. However, she did not understand why he decided to do this right now, when she was completely unsure of everything. Caitlin stood up from her seat and replied that she had asked for love, and not for a forced kiss that he thought she might like. What he did really disgusted her, so she opened the door and replied that she would pretend as if it had not happened, so she asked him to just leave now and not make the situation worse. Arson was truly amazed. However, he understood that if he stayed, he would only anger the girl even more. Therefore, he nevertheless agreed and left as she asked. Meanwhile, Theodore was on the training ground with the rest of the knights. He was conducting a special training session for them, which was quite difficult. Having told them to do the set of exercises they had learned again, he told them to straighten up, and the guys who were holding the heavy balls in their hands immediately did so. After that, he told them to do it over and over again. And then suddenly Alexander, who was Caitlin's brother, lost his balance and broke the formation. He understood that he was being adored again, and because of this, he was very disappointed in himself. But he tried to return to duty as quickly as possible so that the commander would not pay attention to it. The guy named James, who was standing next to him, immediately sighed heavily because he knew that if the commander noticed that something went wrong, he would make them do the same exercises again. And he was already tired of it. Then suddenly Theodore approached this guy and asked who allowed him to relax the stance they were supposed to stand in. As soon as James heard this, he immediately became indignant and replied that he simply started over because Green had made a mistake and he thought that this was what needed to be done. As soon as Theodore heard about this, he immediately asked if Alexander Green had made a mistake. James replied that he was sure that he had simply been unable to maintain his balance and for this reason had broken formation. But Theodore meanwhile turned to everyone present and said in a very stern voice that Green was not mistaken. The people who were standing around were surprised when they heard this. However, the commander said that, in addition to everything, he points out mistakes. This is his job, and he asked James who gave him the right to stop the training. Theodore began to shout at the knights, asking if they had really gone completely mad. Since they had done something like that, James immediately asked him for forgiveness and said that it would never happen again. Meanwhile, the commander approached Alexander and told him to go with him and talk alone for a while. Of course, the guy was very surprised to hear this. However, seeing that the man had left, he had to follow him because he knew that he could not disobey. As they walked, Alexander thought about the fact that Theodore was really the very first man that everyone wanted to be their husband, and also the man whom many women wanted as a son-in-law, and the man whom you want as an acquaintance because he really was delightful in everything. Theodore was the commander of the Imperial Knights of the Spirit Empire, and in that empire they worshipped radishes, and he became the commander of the knights only when he reached the age of 28. And yet, there was still one rather strange rumor following him that Theodore was secretly in love with Alexander Green, and for this reason, when the man called him to talk alone, all the knights immediately began to giggle and whisper among themselves. The men understood perfectly well what this meant for themselves, and for this reason they wished Alexander good luck. Soon, when they were alone, Theodore became a little embarrassed and he didn't know where to start the conversation. Alexander stood at a distance from him, and was in fact very embarrassed as well. Special treatment was nothing new to him. But this was the first time that the commander had called him in this way, and therefore he did not know what it could mean. At that moment, Alexander even thought that, judging by how nervous the captain was, he was finally going to confess to him. In fact, Theodore was the man who had never even approached women, and now he called him, and even blushed because of excitement. The man stuttered and could not formulate his proposal normally. Of course, Alexander did not see any other explanation except that he wanted to say that he wanted to date him and that he had some feelings. But the guy had no idea how he was supposed to answer this. If he refused, his knightly career would be over. But he wasn't going to agree either, because he loved women. But at that moment, Theodore finally wanted to tell him something. However, Alexander interrupted him. He understood that he had to act preemptively. He turned to the captain and said that his sister was sick that day and asked if he could leave training a little earlier so that he could visit and check on her. Theodore, upon hearing that Lady Green was ill, immediately became worried and asked if this was really true. Of course, Alexander was a little ashamed of this, but he said that of course it was because the count was busy with work, and therefore he could not leave her alone when she was sick, so he simply had to ask him to leave early. The captain, hearing all this, sighed heavily and said that of course it was impossible to leave a sick person alone, so he allowed Green to go home early that day and visit his sister. The guy, hearing about this, simply beamed with joy. He thanked the captain, and after that he began to leave, saying that in that case he would go. But before he managed to leave, the captain also said that later after all the training he would also visit their estate, and Alexander, hearing about this, was amazed and immediately asked why this was done. But the man, seeing the surprise on his face, immediately asked why he was so surprised, because a month had already passed since his promotion, and he felt embarrassed that he had not yet congratulated him properly. So he thought that this moment was ideal. Alexander was still worried that he wanted to confess something to him, so he immediately replied that he really shouldn't have done it, but Theodore said that it was the duty of the knight's commander, so this issue was not discussed. Smiling, Theodore said that he should at least personally thank Count Green for allowing his precious son to become a warrior of the empire. For him, it was truly a great honor. Alexander was already sweating all over from the excitement he was experiencing. He couldn't believe that the man was really serious about all this. He even thought that if he skipped all the nonsense and taking into account the fact that Theodore decided to go straight to his parents, he wanted to secure the deal and talk about a more serious relationship between them. While Alexander was dealing with his commander there, Caitlin was getting ready for the trip. Her maid asked if she really thought that this needed to be done. She explained that she could simply go somewhere with clean air outside the capital and not torture herself. And besides, she was against the girl going to Catherine, so the lady asked the maid why she didn't like her so much. Amy explained that it wasn't that she didn't like her. She just felt uncomfortable around Catherine and couldn't figure out what she was really thinking. But Caitlin, smiling happily, replied that they hadn't seen her for a long time anyway, and for that reason she wasn't going to cancel the trip. She also told Emma that the nine had known each other for a long time, and for this reason she believed that the girl could even be happy about this long-awaited meeting. After some time, Caitlin finally got herself together. She went out to the carriage and said that Emma also had to watch her facial expressions, because usually all her emotions were shown there. The maid sighed heavily and said that she would definitely take care of herself, and after that she suddenly stopped when she saw the man who came to them. Amy even shouted at Caitlin, seeing her excitement, and immediately asked what had happened. She continued to walk on, not even noticing that a man had appeared in front of her. But as soon as she crashed into his chest, she immediately turned her head to the side and saw that she had crashed straight into Theodore. The man was surprised. For some time he just looked at her, Caitlin, because she didn't expect to see him even screamed. She quickly ran away from him and after that sighed heavily and said that she almost lost her child from this fear. As soon as the man heard about this, you were even more surprised. He asked if she was pregnant, and at that moment the girl regretted that she had said those words at all. She immediately asked with a trembling voice if he was really asking if she was pregnant. She decided to get out of this situation and yelled at the man, saying that it was very rude of him to ask such questions to a lady. At that moment she even swung her fist at him. Caitlin hit him right in the chest, and after that she felt a strong pain because it was like steel, although she put a lot of effort into this blow. Then Caitlin suddenly began to realize her behavior and realized that no matter how confused she was, she still shouldn't have hit a stranger in the chest without reason. It made her feel very awkward. She began to move her hand away from him, trying to do it as discreetly as possible, but then suddenly Theodore grabbed her wrist so that she would not remove her hand. Then their eyes met, and the man took her hand more tenderly. Because of this, Caitlin even blushed a little. She felt incredibly awkward. Amy, who was standing next to them, watched all this and could not believe that there was such chemistry between them. Some time passed since then, and Caitlin still went outside to talk to Theodore. When the man explained the whole situation to her, she asked in surprise, did her brother really believe without suspicion that someone like that, a high-ranking captain of the Rifle Corps? Well, it's great to visit the house of a subordinate knight. The man in turn asked why he couldn't believe it, since he didn't see anything strange there. Caitlin then raised her voice and said that he really was hopeless. Was he really going to spread rumors about their relationship around the county and thus decided to become her enemy, because she certainly wouldn't want that? But Theodore replied that a thief always gives himself away. No one suspects anything, so he doesn't intend to prove anything to people or persuade them. Caitlin then sighed heavily and thought that he was probably so persistent in continuing this damn partnership that she didn't like at all and that she was against. She wondered if it was worth it for her to cling so obsessively to one night of fun, and especially Theodore, because he didn't know her at all and she didn't understand how he wanted it so much. They walked on for some time in complete silence, and then Caitlin turned to Lord Hurt and said that the fact that he came to her that day was strange to her. So the girl decided to clarify the point whether I should consider this a desire to maintain their cold relationship or whether it was something else. The man was a little surprised when he heard about this, and the catering asked if he might want to marry her or something like that. Theodore was sincerely amazed as soon as he heard such statements. After all, he had already explained his position to the girl more than once and did not understand why she decided to ask such questions. Of course, Caitlin understood that being against marriage, he did not like to hear about the wedding, but she could not do anything about it. She needed to find out all the details. And this is mine, she continued the conversation, and told him to introduce a cute newborn baby, his plump glasses and pouty lips. The girl said that their hands and feet were the size of Lord Hart's thumb, and it was precisely these babies that you couldn't get tired of looking at all day long. Thinking about this, Caitlin immediately smiled and said that it would be incredible happiness if there was a baby in the world who would look like Theodore. She continued to hint to the man and said that surely even such a person could somehow want a child more, but the man was very embarrassed after hearing all this and did not understand why she was even having this conversation. However, soon after, sighing heavily, he replied that she shouldn't worry about it. Marriage and children are completely unnecessary things for him, so he definitely wouldn't want to talk about something like that. He also smiled and added that being with the girl was enough for him and he didn't want anything more. Hearing this, Caitlin was sincerely amazed. She thought that he was a real scoundrel to openly declare that he only needed her body. It was very low on his part. The girls even became disgusted to stand next to him. However, Theodore turned around and said that he was tired of talking about such boring things. This only made him even more depressed. Caitlin then followed him at a slow pace and said that she had just brought up the subject and didn't think it could upset him so much or even hurt him. The man ignored these words and asked if she was planning to continue dating Lord Moore after that day that happened several months ago. Caitlin thoughtfully replied that she didn't know yet, didn't think that there would be reasons to cross paths with him, so she hadn't yet had time to think through this whole moment. They went out onto a small bridge near the water, and Theodore asked if Lord Moore was really her type, since he was possibly attractive to some, and he wanted to know if the girl found him attractive. Caitlin came closer to him and thoughtfully said that Arson was certainly against it, but not entirely. That's why she dated him all the time, of course, not only because of his appearance. Then the man carefully asked why she was dating him, since it wasn't about his appearance after all. Caitlin didn't answer this for a while. She thought about why she had to tell him such little things. If it weren't for the child, she really wouldn't have had any contact with him. But in the end, she said that when she was 12, she almost got into big trouble and told him the story of how they met. During the Second Spiritual War, there was an incident with the escape of prisoners. Theodore replied that he knew about it. Caitlin replied that it was quite obvious that he knew about it, and also asked if it was true that he even participated in that war. The man said that everything was exactly like that. But the girl continued to tell her story and said that on that day she was accidentally kidnapped by those prisoners who had escaped. A young girl in expensive clothes was a good target for raising funds for an escape. It was a tavern dungeon, and she was kept there for about a week. She assumed that these people considered her too high-born a noblewoman to raise their hand against her, so thank God no one committed violence against her. But they were discussing right in front of Caitlin whether to kill her or what they needed to do next, but luckily, somehow 2 or 3 royal knights came to capture the prisoners of the kingdoms, and so the girls were lucky that they saved her then. Arson then hugged her tightly and said that everything would be fine. She cried so hard that even her eyes were swollen, and she couldn't calm down. She was hysterical. Caitlin didn't even have time to examine the knight's face, but she remembered one thing for sure: the huge sword that pierced his right shoulder. The girl sighed heavily and said that he must have been incredibly wounded fighting and holding her in his arms, and it was very hard for him to do this because she could not help him in any way. Tador was about to say something, but the girl interrupted him and said that in the end she found out that it was Arson. The man then mockingly asked if she really thought that the rescuer was Arson. He came closer to her and asked if she was sure of her memory, because he doubted that it was that man who was her savior. He immediately began to raise his voice and said that if this man was so seriously injured, then he should probably have a scar left, and he asked if Caitlin had seen Arson Mura's scar on his right shoulder. The girl thought seriously, saying that you probably had this scar there, so she did not understand why these questions. Caitlin also explained that she had never seen this man naked, so she couldn't know for sure. But for some reason she had a good feeling about this. Then Theodore suddenly smiled happily and said that this meant that the girl saw him naked first, but not her fiancé. Caitlin was very angry that he said such phrases. She hit him in the chest again and said that if anyone heard this, she would really strangle him with her own hands. The man laughed for a while, but when the girl was about to hit him in the chest again, he grabbed her hands and their eyes met. Caitlin thought that she had eaten something wrong and did not understand what was happening to her at all. Why she began to beat him for the second time. But she decided not to show the man that she was a little worried about this reason, and asked why he was touching her all the time. Theodore answered that he did it because he wanted to touch her. He kissed her hand tenderly and said in a quiet, muffled voice that even just looking at her immediately turned him on. As soon as the girl heard these words, she could not understand what this guy was saying at all, and most importantly, why these phrases had such an effect on her. Her cheeks turned red and her heart began to beat faster. But in fact, at that moment she remembered her dream that she constantly had. This dream was a memory from her past. She was sitting next to a knight whom she considered Arson when he was already wounded. The man stroked her head and said that she did not need to be afraid. He would definitely take her home safely. He also then told the girl to close her eyes tightly and just count to 100, and then they would already be at home. Catering when she was still little, she really couldn't remember his face well, but for some reason this voice was quite calming for her. With tears in her eyes, she asked us then that the man should under no circumstances die, otherwise she would definitely not survive it. The man then stroked her head again and smiling said that everything was fine. He definitely wouldn't die, and for this reason she didn't need to worry. Caitlin then continued to cry. She said that she had nothing to give him as a reward, and then she replied that as a reward she could marry him in the future when she grew up. Of course, Caitlin, realizing the fact that she was at that age and filled with vanity, and also fully aware of her noble origin, said something like this to express gratitude and was pleased that she did it. However, in reality, now that several years had passed, the girl realized that she had done this only because of her father, because at every opportunity he did not forget to remind her about the wedding. The man kept asking how lucky he was that his beautiful daughter would be his. He kept repeating such nonsense that in the end, Caitlin really did think in her childhood that some incredibly handsome man should marry her. Even when she was very young, she thought about marriage, and now it surprised her incredibly much because she didn't like that at all. Of course, after so much time, Caitlin could not clearly remember the face of the knight who saved her. However, for some reason she clearly remembered the expression on his face. He then smiled and said that he was ready to wait a few years for her to grow up and for them to get married. Some time has passed since then, but in fact, Caitlin had already come to visit Catherine and accidentally fell asleep after a long journey. Because she had a bad dream, she jumped up screaming and shouted Arson Mira's name. A girl passing by was very surprised by this scream, but then she smiled and asked if she had just dreamed of her brother Arson. She was a beautiful young lady with long golden hair and blue eyes. The girl stroked Caitlin and said that her face was just awful. Even if she dreamed of her brother Arson, she did not understand why the girl looked like that. Caitlin hugged Catherine and said that she was in pain. The girl thought that she really was sick, so everyone around her allowed the girl to lay her head on her lap. Then she started stroking her head, and Caitlin felt how pleasant it was. All the stress immediately went into another plane as soon as she found herself next to this girl who always calmed her down. In fact, Catherine Bennington's body is the daughter of their Earl's chief maid, Lady Merrill, and she was part of the family since she and Kathleen grew up together since childhood. When Lady Merrill came to the Count's estate, she was already in the late stages of pregnancy, and her father, taking pity on the woman who would have to raise the child alone, quietly gave her a place in a small house in the capital. That's how she was next to Caitlin since she was born, and her friend Catherine was already more than 12 years old. They really got along very well with each other and never quarreled. Catherine was simply a refuge for Caitlin and truly the most reliable person in that world, so she could trust her with absolutely anything. The girl lay in silence for a while, after which she turned to her friend and asked if there had ever been a moment in her life when she would really like to see her father. As soon as Kate heard about this, she was very surprised and told her friend that she was not sure. She did not even know what her father looked like, so she probably never really wanted to meet him. Caitlin continued to ask questions and wondered if this really meant that even if the girl didn't know his face, she didn't miss him at all and didn't want to establish some kind of communication with him. Catherine felt very awkward talking about it. She said that she didn't miss him. However, she hated him with all her soul, and if she could take revenge, she really would do it. Eat. The girl, hearing about this, was immediately a little surprised, because she was just thinking about what to do with Theodore because he was, after all, the father of her child. And as soon as she heard something like this from her friend who did not have a father, that is, it became uncomfortable. Her friend then smiled and said that she saw how hard it was for her mother, and for this reason it was very unpleasant for her to even think about that person. She also said that her father, in addition to everything, knows about her existence and how her mother raised her alone through all these difficulties. He knew all this but still did nothing. Caitlin, hearing this, was very surprised. She looked at her friend and asked how it was possible that she didn't know about this before, because the girl said that she didn't know what her father looked like and who he was. Catherine replied that she didn't know. But that didn't mean that her mother didn't know, and for that reason she firmly decided for herself that she would never forgive the man who abandoned them. As soon as Caitlin saw her in such a state, she was very shocked. She saw her for the first time. She smiled incredibly evilly. She tried to defuse the situation and told her friend not to swear there. After all, she still had her, and she thought that they were a good team. Kate smiled and said that she was really grateful to her for this. However, after that, she asked why her friend suddenly decided to ask about this. Caitlin was a little worried. She understood that now she could very easily say something that she shouldn't. So with a trembling voice, she answered that she was just curious, that's all. The girl felt that she would end up raising a child without a father. But she couldn't say it to her friend directly, so she decided to just get out of the situation in a different way. Her friend understood perfectly well that she was not obliged to share everything. So she decided to change the subject of the conversation and, taking a cookie, asked how things had been with Arson lately. Laughing, the girl said that she had been dying of curiosity all this time, so she asked Caitlin to tell her everything in detail, since she was really very interested in knowing it. Caitlin then sighed heavily and told her about all this, but in fact, she was very tired of it. After all, she had again started another round of conversations about Arson, a man who was extremely unpleasant to her. She didn't want to blame everything on him. But if you look at it, it all started with this very person. She was incredibly angry at Arson and didn't understand why everything couldn't have turned out differently. Then, when Caitlin finished telling her story, she told her friend that she actually didn't want to marry Arson, and her friend, upon hearing this, was sincerely shocked. She turned to the girl and in a very serious voice asked why she made such a decision. She immediately said that it was very strange because all this time she always talked about how much they loved him and that she couldn't wait to get married to him. And then suddenly she came and said that she was no longer going to marry him. Caitlin replied that there was no special reason. She just decided so, but her friend continued to insist and asked why suddenly. Did she really meet someone else who she liked even more and thus simply fell out of love with Arson? She looked away from her and said that this was not at all true. Arson did not love her, and for this reason she did not think about the wedding anymore. Then Katrin suddenly grabbed her hand and immediately said that she could see the character of her brother Arson. He was shy and just wanted to keep his distance. She shouldn't do it hastily. She sighed heavily and said that he had no feelings for her. He had another girl that he really liked, and so she simply decided that she would also stop loving him, and thus they would simply break up. She said that she thought that it would be much more correct that way, but then suddenly Catherine grabbed her hand even tighter and asked if he really said those words. As soon as the girl saw such an expression on her friend's face, she immediately became wary and replied that the man had certainly said so. However, she also wanted to explain something to her. She explained to Catherine that he had told her to continue planning for the wedding as planned, but not to pressure him about dating until now. Maybe he had another woman that he liked more than Caitlin. The girl, as soon as she said these words again, became incredibly angry, and she did not understand why it had such an effect on her, and it really irritated her. As soon as Catherine heard what he said, she immediately understood that it was really serious. But the girl then took a new cookie and replied that everything was fine with her and that her friends shouldn't worry, because there were many men in the world that she would still fall in love with. So the world didn't end with Arson. However, her friend suddenly took her hand and said that she wished the girl had not made such a hasty decision and asked how long she had loved her brother Arson and no one else. The girl said that she could not believe that Caitlin would be able to so easily give up these feelings and move on. Then she also said in a serious voice that men's hearts are very fickle. The only woman who suited Arson was a caker, so she advised her friend to hold on to common sense. After that, she also decided to remind her about the day when Arson allegedly saved her. Caitlin turned away from her and said that she knew all this perfectly well, but she did not want to talk about it anymore. The girl, who continued to insist, replied that she just wanted to tell Caitlin to think a little more, because it could be a hasty decision and completely stupid at the same time. After that, she also said that she would definitely count Arson out later so that Caitlin could not worry about him not getting what he deserved. The girl immediately smiled upon hearing this, when she slowly touched her stomach and thought about the fact that perhaps, because of another man's child who was now inside her, it seemed to her that the relationship with Arson that she had built up over many years had finally ended. Of course, Caitlin hadn't given birth yet, so she didn't know for sure. However, she assumed that the child would definitely look like Theodore, since he had quite expressive facial features. She also thought that this child, just like that annoying guy, had been tormenting her ever since he appeared in her womb. Every time she ate kale, everything came back out, and in a few days she lost all her weight because she simply couldn't eat normally. Nothing stayed in her body. She even had some constipation. It was very difficult for her to go to the toilet. Caitlin had no strength and she constantly wanted to sleep. So almost all days she just lay in bed. At some moments, the girl even thought that it would be better for her to just die than to suffer like this. But this was only the beginning. One day she called the doctor Fernand and asked how much longer I could live like this. I had no chance of dying, and also wondered if all this really had to continue like this until the birth of the child. The man, of course, did not want to upset the lady. However, he said that everything was not quite so. She would probably have to suffer for another month or so. As soon as Caitlin heard this, she was incredibly angry. She immediately said that I could not survive a week feeling like I was dying, and asked how the doctor could say such terrible things to her. But Fernando told her not to move abruptly and to calm down, because getting angry is very harmful for a child. After that, he gave her medicine for morning sickness. It should have helped her at least a little. At that moment, Emmy turned to her. She turned to the lady and said that it was time to start preparing. If she was feeling too bad that day, then it was worth canceling the event that she was supposed to organize. The doctor, upon hearing this, was immediately very surprised and asked if the girl really had to go somewhere today, since he didn't want to detain her. But the maid replied that this was not so. She had a regular meeting of the First Royal Knightly Order that day, and it was taking place right in their residence. Therefore, some preparations were underway. Emmy explained that this time, since the young master was celebrating his promotion, the master decided to invite everyone, and for that reason, it was a big event. At that moment, Caitlin sighed heavily and said that she still had to be there. If she missed the home event, people around her would start asking a lot of questions, and she definitely didn't need that. The maid smiled and immediately said that in that case she would start preparing everything to help the girl get ready. And Caitlin asked why Amy looked so worried. Amy then ran to the side and said that of course she should be excited because Lord Hurd was coming that day, but the lady asked if it had anything to do with her. The maid, picking up a comb, said that of course it had a direct relation, and also added to Fernando that he should have seen it a few days ago. Lord Hurt came to their residence and it was amazing. She said that if he had seen the way their miss looked at him, he would have immediately realized that there was definitely some kind of spark between them. The doctor, hearing this, immediately asked if it was true, and Amy said that it was the first time she had really seen Theodore. She had heard that he looked like some kind of strange bandit, but in the end it turned out that it was not true. The girl with a smile on her face said that he was very manly and looked fresh. But at that moment, Caitlin thought that he was not fresh at all. His one frowning look made her legs freeze in an instant, and this really alarmed her. Meanwhile, Amy had already begun to tidy up the lady's hair and, smiling, said that she personally considered him many times better than Lord Moore. She thought that Lord Moore was so handsome that it was too much. He looked as if he might not cope at night at the most crucial moment, and for this reason she had some doubts. As soon as Caitlin heard this, she even choked on the medicine she had taken. She started yelling at her maid and said that she had talked too much and that it would be better for her not to continue this whole topic. If her tongue was precious. The doctor, meanwhile, turned to Miss and asked when she planned to tell the Count about this whole situation. because he believed that he had the right to know. How could he say that he saw him a little earlier in the reception room and he asked about the lady's health? Of course, he had to lie and cover for the girl, but he didn't like it at all. Caitlin was silent for a while. And then she added that he had said that she had time until the baby was full term. So she thought that after it became completely noticeable, then she would say, but the doctor tried to get it across to her, saying that this was not something that could be hidden for long and that she should tell the truth as soon as possible. However, the girl, of course, did not listen to him. Then Amy took the lady by the hand and said that first she should tell Lord Hurt and not the master, and only after that she could deal with everything else. Fernand, as soon as he heard that she had told me the truth up until now, Theodore was very surprised and asked what she thought of herself. She replied that it wasn't that she hadn't told him yet. She simply couldn't do it. But when the man already wanted to tell her something, she interrupted him and told him not to worry and not to pressure her. She understood perfectly well that she had to tell him about it, and she would do it. Well, of course, she understood everything so well that she couldn't just suddenly tell him that he had married her and that they should now be together. After all, this was the man who didn't want marriage or children, but simply wanted to be with her. Caitlin knew that first, like a slow drizzle that soaks through clothes. She naturally needed to convince Lord Theodore of the importance of family and, of course, the unprecedented need for children in his life. She was already under enormous stress because of the child who was gradually growing inside her. And now she also had to think about this. The girl did not like all this at all, and because of this, she was constantly unhappy. Emmy, when she saw the excitement on the lady's face, immediately said that Miss was simply afraid to say it, because as soon as she said it, it would not become a big problem for the Lord and he might even like it. After that, the maid said that on this day she would even wear the brooch that Theodore had given her. But Caitlin behaved completely calmly, even to her own surprise. Some people sighed so hard that I climbed so that the earth would not swallow them. But the girl was completely different. She had a strong character and she always knew what she wanted. That same evening, Catherine met Arson, who came to her room later that night. The man was kneeling in front of her, and when she addressed him, he began to listen to her attentively. Catherine said that Caitlin came last night and she said that she would not marry Arson. As soon as the girl said these words, she immediately began to smile. The man, hearing this, immediately realized that she was incredibly weak now, so he replied that Catherine would not worry. He would talk to her again, so everything would get better. However, Catherine said that these words were the first to come from her lips, and asked if Arson even knew how she felt after so many years spent for her misfortune. Ms. China, hearing this, panicked. However, the girl extended her hand to him and told him to listen to her carefully. There was no second chance for her. The man she can love this man is Caitlin Green and not Arson Moore. At this moment, she moved closer to him and even put her hands on his face. After that, the girl moved him closer to her and kissed him on the lips. The man even blushed a little from this. She called him her love and asked him not to hope for more understanding, but to understand everything as it is. In fact, Arson was so in love with this girl that even when she was angry with him, he still considered her incredibly beautiful and was ready to admire her all the time. When the next day came, there was a regular meeting of the Imperial Knights, or rather a party to celebrate the promotion of Caitlin's brother Alex, disguised as this meeting. It took place in the annex of their family estate. Until then, Caitlin still did not understand why they decided to hold a regular meeting of knights in this particular place. However, she could not influence this decision in any way. What's more important, she didn't understand why, as soon as she arrived at this event, she heard a chamber music ensemble playing there. Of course, she expected to hear such music at a tea party for noble ladies, and not at a meeting of strong and courageous knights. For this reason, the girl was already wary. Caitlin sat at the table and drank her drink. She thought that if her mother were alive, the party would definitely not be so chaotic and completely inappropriate. On top of that, it was a completely crazy seating arrangement since she was sitting with her brother and, of course, Theodore and a few other knights nearby. Then Earl Green, who was Caitlin's father, was also sitting at the table. He decided to be the first to say his toast. The man raised his glass and said that he knew that from the moment Alexander took up a sword at the age of 6, he would become an excellent knight and achieve many successes in his life. Theodore then smiled and raised his glass up and said that as soon as he first saw Sir Green in the Second Order, he thought that this was truly a man with talent. Caitlin, who was sitting next to him, glanced at the man. She didn't expect that he was going to play along with her father like that. It was strange for her. I also assumed that he was just trying to impress him, or something like that. But at that moment, Kraft laughed and said that his son had always been talented and that he probably took after him in character, because as a child he was good at everything. Alexander, who heard all this, felt very awkward. He asked his father to stop praising him and finally changed the subject of the conversation. Well, Caitlin was also very awkward to be there, but she still thought that Alex was embarrassed, and not she herself. And she really hoped that the conversation would not go beyond her, and she would not have to blush as much as her brother. However, at that moment, Father said that of course they can no longer forget about their beloved little princess. Caitlin immediately understood that he was talking about her, and really hoped that he would quickly stop all this. The man said that he wanted a daughter so much, and when she was born, he was in seventh heaven, and for some time he couldn't believe his luck. Smiling and remembering all these moments, he said that she could barely speak but looked at him, and with only her lips said the word dad. He was even ready to shed a tear and said that this feeling is impossible to understand. Until you experience it yourself, Caitlin was horrified. She did not understand what the Count was doing at all. He told stories about children in front of a guy who hated the very idea of marriage and all that. Theodore, who had been listening attentively to all this, laughed and said that he was sure that she had been just as charming as a child. But her father, smiling happily, said that she was still very sweet, took after her mother. She also had fair skin and big sparkling eyes. He sighed heavily and said that she was indeed incredibly sweet and beautiful. It was hard for him to look at Caitlin and not think about his late wife. However, that was life. But Theodore then suddenly smiled and said that it was all true. She really was very beautiful. He had not seen a more beautiful young lady in the capital than Lady Green. As soon as the girl heard this, she was very shocked. Her whole face turned red. She could not understand whether they really decided to just take and mock her in this way. But her father sighed heavily and said that he didn't think he would ever be able to give up his baby and would like her to live with him forever. But of course he understood that this was impossible. How heavily he sighed. He said that she was too carried away by Arson, and he certainly would not be able to keep her forever. And then Caitlin understood that he had already begun to cross all sorts of boundaries. She didn't understand how he could talk only about the most sensitive and not very pleasant topics, as if he was doing it on purpose and knew that it was better not to do it at that moment. Laughing nervously, Caitlin immediately asked her father what he was saying, because she felt very awkward. But the man did not understand her hints and continued. He said that Arson was like a son to him, so he was not worried. However, of course, as a father, he still had special feelings about this, so he could not ignore them. But then suddenly, when the girl was about to say something, Theodore intervened in the conversation. He again turned to the man and asked if he really wanted to say that the lady was in a relationship with Sir Moore. He glanced at the girl flirtatiously and said that he thought that Lady Green had been dating someone else all this time, and also asked her if it wasn't true. Caitlin didn't know what to say to that. She couldn't figure out what kind of answer he wanted to hear from her, and that made her nervous. She understood that perhaps he wanted her to say that he was the one in the relationship right in front of her father and Alex. But she definitely didn't want to do that. Arson, who was sitting next to them, broke the silence and turned to the captain and said that there must have been some misunderstanding and he had misunderstood everything. The man said with a smile on his face that he and Kate were in a relationship and were dating very seriously and had been thinking about marriage for a long time. So, what he heard was not true. Theodore, hearing this, was sincerely amazed and began to look harshly at Arson, who in turn, smiling happily, said that this was the true version. Caitlin immediately realized that this awkward atmosphere needed to be diluted with something. So she laughed and turned to Arson and said, was he still thinking about what happened between them when they were still just children? As soon as Father and Alexander, together with Arson, heard this, they were very shocked. They could not believe that she really just now said absolutely that she did not love this man and was not thinking about marrying him. Caitlin felt all these tense looks on herself very well, so she decided to change the subject of the conversation, and smiling said that the fruits were incredibly fresh and tasty and also asked to try them. As soon as she took one of the fruits to try, she really understood that it was very tasty. It was the only product that she had finally been able to eat in recent times. Due to morning sickness, she never had breakfast. However, this orange was just perfect for her, so she quickly began to eat the entire orange on her plate. Alexander, seeing her quick reaction, immediately asked if she really liked it, and the Count, smiling, replied that she usually hated sour and barely touched oranges. However, for some reason, on this day, she liked everything. At that moment, the girl thought that she had eaten too greedily and because of this had attracted unnecessary attention to herself. But she was really so hungry that she simply could not resist. Edor, noticing her appetite, immediately smiled and said that he was glad that she was healthy, after which he held out his plate, on which there were also several oranges. He also smiled and focused on the brooch that he had given her, saying that it was very beautiful. He also added that he was absolutely sure that this brooch would suit her perfectly, and he was not mistaken, which could not but please. At that moment, Caitlin did not understand what was happening at all and was also trying to figure out how to explain it all to the people around her. She didn't know what to do because at this stage everyone around noticed the strange tension. Now it couldn't be hidden. She even assumed that everyone had already guessed long ago that there was something between her and Theodore. Therefore, she thought about how she could get out of this situation. But she sighed heavily and thought that they could think absolutely anything they wanted. She didn't see the point in worrying too much about it. So, smiling, she thanked Sir Hurt for this gift and said that she would definitely wear it often because it was really very beautiful and suited her perfectly. But she soon thought that in general it was all for the best. She needed to break off relations with Arson, and sooner or later she would have to tell her father and Alex about her pregnancy. So she figured that this was just the perfect chance for her to do all of this without hurting herself in the process. However, at that moment, the waiter came and served a new dish for the lady. He put the pickled net on the table and then immediately left. However, because of this incredibly pungent smell, the girl immediately began to feel sick. She could not understand why this happened. She really hoped that this would not happen right at such a crucial moment. She tried to calm down, and for a while the nausea passed. However, soon it returned again with great force. Therefore, Caitlin immediately got up from her seat and began to run out of the hall because she understood that very soon she would throw up, and she did not want to do it in front of everyone. Theodore was about to get up from his seat and said that he was a little worried and wondered if maybe he should go and check on her since it really wasn't normal. But her father smiled and said that of course he was grateful to him. However, there was no need for this. Everything was fine. And he turned to Arson and asked if he could go and see how the girl was there. Of course, Theodore, having heard this, was incredibly amazed. He could not believe that the Count had actually done this, but of course the commander did not go anywhere because he understood that it was wrong to do so. Therefore, he simply remained in his place but was incredibly amazed. Meanwhile, Caitlin had already calmed down. She felt a little better, and she went to her bedroom and lay down on the bed so that she wouldn't feel so sick anymore. Arson came to her and asked if everything was okay with her and also what and where hurt, but the girl did not even look at him. She said that now she was okay, and he did not need to worry. He was silent for a while, and then he asked her not to be angry with him anymore, even as a joke. It hurts to hear her say things like that, like at a meeting with her father, but the girl replied that it was not a joke at all. If he meant that conversation about their relationship, she asked him for forgiveness, but said that she would never want to discuss all this with him again. She also added that even if he broke up with the girl he said he loved, she would still tell him no, so he just needed to come to terms with it. In fact, it wasn't that the girl didn't want to, but that she simply couldn't. Then Arson suddenly raised his voice at her and asked the girl why she was being so stubborn. Then Caitlin couldn't take it anymore. She sat up on the bed and looked at Arson and asked what he was even saying, and why he thought she was being stubborn. The girl started yelling at him and said that she didn't understand him at all. What exactly is so difficult for him? Is it really more difficult than being an idiot in love for 10 years, running after him like a puppy, and eventually finding out that he doesn't even love her at all? Arson then quietly asked her for forgiveness and said that from that moment on it would be better for her, for their common future. But Caitlin asked what it would do to her if he got better. She didn't want him to get better. She didn't care about it now. She just wanted him to leave her alone. Arson suddenly took her hand and, looking straight into her eyes, said that if she wanted something, she could just tell him about it. He was ready to do anything for her. As soon as the girl heard this, everything immediately became clear to her. She thought about how she could have not noticed anything like this at all throughout all these years. Caitlin could understand this just by looking into his eyes, into the eyes of the answer, who looked at him as if there was nothing there. And this made the girl worry at that moment. So she rather quickly removed his hand from hers and said what he should have said before declaring that he had feelings for another. For this reason, she was not going to continue this pointless conversation any longer. She said that she was desperately trying to please him then, and it would have been easy. After that, she got up from her seat and asked for forgiveness, but said that she was no longer an idiot. The girl also said that she didn't know why he needed her so much as a backup option. However, she was no longer interested in him. Therefore, he just had to come to terms with it. When she stood up from her seat, she looked at Arson and asked him to leave, and also added that if he didn't leave now, she would have to do it herself. Arson then took her hand again and pulled her closer to him. The girl immediately panicked, but she tried to keep a calm voice and asked him to let her go, and also added that she was in pain. At that moment, Caitlin also did not understand why it was in this situation that she remembered Sarah Hart when Theodore came to their villa. Then he grabbed her wrist in exactly the same way. However, all the same, even though his hand was very big and strong, it felt quite tender, but now this thin, long and beautiful hand of Arson turned out to be painful and numb for her. The man finally listened to her and let her go. He said that between them, after all, there were so many years of acquaintance and then again communication, and he asked if she really thought that all this could be so easily let go and erased. Caitlin replied that she was going to at least try, but the man, hearing this phrase, immediately smiled and said that this meant that she had not yet been able to erase all this completely. Therefore, he had hope. In fact, she didn't understand at all what was happening. He said that he had another girl that he liked. She replied that she would step aside, so she didn't understand why Arson was now clinging to her so desperately. That's why she understood that he wouldn't leave her alone. So simply, and with a sigh, she said that she could admit that she was still not indifferent to him. However, she also added that she had no desire to reconsider their relationship, so he could not worry and calmly date that lady and even marry her. She did not understand what his problem was. Arson then began to approach the girl. He even put his hand on her waist. She tried to move away from him, asking what he was doing, and also asked him to stop because it was unpleasant for her. But the man was very persistent. He began to let her go and began to reach for her lips. Caitlin asked what was wrong with him and whether he had accidentally gone crazy. But fortunately for Caitlin, there was a knock on the door and Theodore's voice was heard, turning to Lord Moore and asking if he was still inside. At that moment, the girl was incredibly happy to hear this voice. She thought that she was saved and immediately began to turn to hurt. But she didn't have time to finish the sentence because Arson closed her mouth and grabbed her other hand so that she couldn't get out. The girl didn't understand what was happening at all and she became scared. But as soon as she looked at Arson, she saw a truly distraught look there. She did not understand who this person was and wondered if this was really the same kind guy she had known practically her entire life, because at that moment, it did not seem that way to her. Meanwhile, Theodore knocked again. He turned to Lady Green and asked if she was there. The girl, of course, tried to say something, but only a mooing sound came out. Tears even appeared in her eyes. She really hoped that the man would come in and take her away. But of course, she was not heard. Then the footsteps of Theodore were heard entering from the door, and Arson finally let go of the girl's mouth, who was incredibly shocked by the situation that had happened. Then the man asked her for forgiveness in a very cold voice. Meanwhile, Caitlin gradually began to come to her senses. She turned to him and started screaming loudly, calling him a real idiot. And then the door to the room suddenly opened sharply. Theodore came inside and immediately looked angrily at Arson. The girl, who continued to cry in the meantime, looked at him in surprise and could not understand what he was doing there at all, because she clearly heard him leaving. But the captain, as soon as he saw that Arson was holding the girl's hand and not letting her leave, came closer. He took out his sword and pointed it straight at the guy. After this, the man spoke and said that according to the strict code of chivalry of the Empire, any knight who violated the code was to be subject to immediate execution by decision of the commander of the order. He asked if there were any objections, but no one answered. Caitlin stood incredibly shocked by the whole situation and could not believe whether the man was serious about the execution. Then she finally came to her senses when you, Nador, began to bring your sword closer to Arson's throat. She asked him to stop. After all, she and Lord Moore had just argued a little, and that was no reason to execute him. The man then already wanted to object to something. However, Caitlin understood that he did not understand the whole situation and thought about what else she could do to calm him down. Finally, she grabbed his hand and cried even harder, and with a trembling voice she asked him to put down his sword. Of course she couldn't let him kill Arson Moore right in her room for a while. Theodore just looked at the girl, but soon he gave in. With a heavy sigh, the man turned to Arson and said that he had seen with his own eyes how he had violated the knightly code, and therefore he could not even think of relying on it. He said that he declared to forge right there and then, so he had to be prepared for it. In fact, the word deforge from the old imperial language means opportunity, a form of duel that was used when a knight broke the chivalric code. Although the law demanded immediate execution for such a disgrace, the commander could give the knight one last chance. In this formal duel, with witnesses from among the knights or nobles of higher rank, the younger one immediately gains the upper hand. You are both a symbolic forgiveness and a long-standing Sheikh diction that is designed to preserve honor. For this very reason, many people soon gathered in the courtyard to watch this, as well as Arson and Theodore, who stood opposite each other. Caitlin's father immediately turned to her and asked what had happened. What could Arson do that would violate the Geo Knightly Code, which had even led to D-Forge? The girl understood perfectly well that this was a very serious matter, but she did not answer anything. I hope that her father will not question her further. With a heavy sigh, the Count said that he was shocked when the archer asked to borrow the training ground and offered him to be a witness to this very competition. He looked at his daughter and asked if she really knew anything about this. Caitlin, of course, lied when she said she knew nothing, but it was better for her. In fact, she didn't even know what to start explaining. If she told the truth, her father and brother could act very recklessly and kill Arson, and since the nature of the violation remained a secret forever, she believed that it was quite normal, of course. Her father was a little upset, but soon accepted the situation as it was. Caitlin, meanwhile, turned to her brother and asked if the older one always let the younger one win in this duel. She also asked if there were any cases when knights did not do this. Alexander thought about it, and after that he said that this almost never happened. The defeat of a commander in a deforge is a sign of forgiveness. So if the disgraced knight cannot win even then this is already complete humiliation and a stigma for life. Alexander explained that this means that such a person should not be publicly executed due to political pressure. However, he should not be recognized as a knight. Caitlin was a little surprised to hear about this because she didn't think that this whole situation was due to political pressure. If you don't keep silent for long, she asked what ultimately happens to the knight who lost the deforge. The brother thought about it and said that there were few such cases. However, those who lost in this battle all committed suicide out of shame. Hearing this, Caitlin was very shocked. However, she did not have time to say anything more because the duel finally began. Alexander continued speaking. He said that even if they had not committed suicide and were just pretending, the pressure from the knights would have been truly unbearable. He doubted that the captain expected victory in the deforge unless he planned to kill his subordinate without getting his hands dirty in this way. Then the girl seriously panicked. After all, this is exactly what Theodore wanted, because she asked him not to kill there, so he decided to find a new way. Meanwhile, the men fought desperately. Caitlin. Watching all this, she even little by little began to feel sorry for Arson because she understood that in this case he was always the loser, especially considering that these are the Imperial Knights of Sparta, where rank was determined solely by skills. The girl realized the fact that if Theodore did not give in, then Arson had no chance of winning this fight. However, when she watched the fight, she noticed that he was giving it his all as if his life depended on this fight, and because of this, Caitlin was a little worried. At that moment, the man knocked the lesson out of Arson's sword and began to approach him closer. The knights did not understand what was happening at all and why the captain did this, because there was no sense in it. They all couldn't believe that the captain actually won the duel with DeForge. At that moment, Theodore came as close as possible to Arson. He knelt down and just stood next to him for a while. However, after he whispered something to him there, he stood up and began to leave. Caitlin was very worried at that moment. She didn't know what would happen to Arson now, and of course, she hoped for the best. But there were no guarantees. And since that moment, some time has passed, and various rumors about the whole situation have spread throughout the capital. Theodore's assistant came to him and said that he had not heard that Sir Moore was dead and said that some were saying that he had simply locked himself in his estate. The man sat without even taking his eyes off the papers and said that it meant he didn't even have the courage to die. Glenn stood in front of the man. He was the butler of the Hurd family, and the man said that he was surprised that Theodore did not feel a drop of sympathy for a subordinate who could end his life at absolutely any moment. Theodore, hearing this, was a little surprised and immediately asked him if he would really feel this sympathy for such a person. But Glenn didn't answer this. He just sighed heavily and thought that he could guess why. Even without his words, it was all because of that young lady from the Green family. Therefore, after a short silence, the man said that if he didn't like it, he had to figure it out on his own, and he didn't understand what all this cowardly nonsense was for. Glenn also said that if I spread strange rumors, it could even undermine the gentleman's popularity. But the man did not understand why he suddenly started talking so furiously about popularity, and replied that he didn't care about it. Continuing to write, Theodore also said that in fact he wanted to kill him right there on the spot. But he couldn't because Caitlin simply stopped him and didn't let him do it. Unfortunately, he didn't. But Glenn was not at all surprised to hear this. He said that it was quite obvious why she tried to stop it. Because in her house, even in her chambers, they were going to kill a person, and it was not surprising that she did not want this to happen. However, Theodore suddenly became so angry that he yelled at his subordinate and said that if the guy had been there, he would have done the same thing. Arson was the real deal and did this. and even cutting his throat would have been a small punishment for someone like him. As soon as Glenn heard all this, he was a little surprised and immediately told his master that he had a rather frightening face, and this made him wary. After that, he advised him to keep this side of his nature away from the young lady, because she was already wary of his sharp features, and if she found out that his character was just as perverted, then she would definitely never be able to even come close to him because she would simply be afraid. But Theodore waved his hand and said that in any case he needed to know who the girl's personal doctor was. And Glenn, hearing this, immediately laughed and asked, did he really think that he was their creator? Of course, he could not know this information. However, there were rumors that it was Fernando, but this was not exactly information. The man explained that he wanted him to tell him that he wanted to see him and asked him to come to the estate for this meeting. Glenn replied that he understood everything and that he would do it. And after that, he left the gentleman alone. Caitlin was sitting with her family and trying to explain the whole situation that happened last day. She said that Arson suddenly grabbed her hand, and at that moment, Mr. Theodore appeared. He saw that the man was going to hurt her, and after that, there was a duel of Daifk, which became a surprise for her as well as for everyone else. As soon as Alexander and the Count heard all this, we were sincerely amazed. They could not believe that it was true. As soon as her father heard all this, he immediately turned to Alex and asked why the archer did not execute this terrible man right there on the spot. He would not have been against it, in fact. He shouted for his son and said that his behavior towards the lady after the knighting. This is not something that the Deforge could decide, and for this reason there should be a more severe punishment because he acted simply disgustingly. Alexander himself was incredibly nervous at that moment. He already wanted to say something to his father, but he didn't have time because Caitlin interrupted him and said that it wasn't his fault at all. King Herd was going to carry out the execution. It was she who simply took him and stopped him. The father, as soon as he heard this, was even more amazed. He did not expect that his daughter could do this, knowing exactly how that man acted. However, soon he calmed down a little, and for some time there was silence between them. He got up and left without saying a single word to his daughter. Caitlin was very excited when Alexander sat down next to her. She asked in a trembling voice if her dad was really that angry about this. Well, the man explained that she shouldn't worry about it, after which he extended his hands forward and told her to move closer because he wanted to hug her and comfort her. As soon as the girl saw this incredibly pleasant gesture from his side, she could not hold back the final hysteria. She moved towards him, hugged the man by the chest, and continued to cry for several minutes without a break. Alexander consoled her and said that she had nothing but a beautiful face. If she cried, she would ruin it too. Therefore, she needed to calm down as soon as possible. As soon as Caitlin heard these words, she immediately became wary and asked what he meant. But the guy then quietly said that she shouldn't take all these words to heart, and especially her father's reaction. He wasn't angry, he was just disappointed, because at that moment he probably wanted to break Arson's arms and legs more than anyone else, because he had no right to do that. Also, after a short silence, he said that he did not know. For what reason the girl suddenly said that she no longer wanted to get married. However, in fact, after these words, he breathed a sigh of relief. Caitlin looked at him in surprise and asked why he had such a reaction, because she thought that he, on the contrary, wanted this marriage. However, he smiled at her brother and said that he knew perfectly well that Arson did not love her, but he would like her to meet a man who would love and value her just as much as his father and he himself did. Yes, even Bolshev wanted for his beloved sister someone who could make her truly happy and loved. After all, this was the kind of person she deserved to have in her life. Alexander smiled tenderly as soon as he said these words, and after that he added that he didn't know whether she would forgive Arson or not. However, asking them to change the outcome of the Deforge or to help him now is definitely pointless. He said that it wouldn't be a good idea because he couldn't even do it after everything he heard. Alexander suddenly stood up from his seat and said that in fact, as her older brother, he had no desire to help this Arson. However, then the girl suddenly folded her hands together and asked him for something. She said that it was completely unimportant whether she forgave him or not. The thought that someone could die because of her was unbearable for her. And if it was Arson, then for her it would be much worse. Alexander stopped, sighing heavily. He said that he understood perfectly. However, after what he did to her, they couldn't just leave it unpunished, and if they did that, their whole family would become a laughingstock. And in the end, he had no say in this matter because everything was on his father. He stroked the girl on the head and said that he thought that he had already decided everything, so there was no turning back. The girl already wanted to object to something, but he began to leave, saying that she was probably also very tired and told her not to worry too much, so that everything should be fine, and also wished her a good rest. When some time had passed since then, Fernando finally came to Theodore. He felt very uncomfortable and did not know what he should do. After all, he had never been in such awkward situations before. Luckily, Theodore spoke first. He said that he was glad to see him, and also that he had heard that the man was the Green family's personal physician. Fernando was very angry at that moment because he was told that the man was almost dying, but in the end he was completely healthy and began to ask about other things. So, with a little irritation in his voice, he turned to Theodore and said that he had heard that he was not well and that he would like to hear what the problem was so that he could help. At that moment, the man, hearing about this, was a little surprised because no one had told him what strategy they were following at all. But touching the back of his head, he said that his head hurt a little. Perhaps he was just thinking too much, and because of this, she simply could not stand it anymore. He didn't even have time to give Fernand time to answer, and turned to him again, changing the subject of the conversation. He said that he had heard that Lady Green had not said hello lately, and wondered if the Palian could tell him what had happened to her. Fernando at that moment seriously thought he did not know what to say. After all, he realized that Milady had not told him the truth, and thought about the fact that the girl should have done this a long time ago. In fact, when Fernandez asked the girl if she could tell him about this, she was very worried, and explained that Sir Hurd was against marriage and children. The only reason he started dating her was because she allowed him to just have fun for a while. She then told her doctor that even if she told him he was right, she was afraid that he might get angry and yell at her for simply ruining his life in such a way. So she was very scared and even began to assume that the best thing to do in this case would be to just keep quiet and raise the child alone. Of course, Fernando could not believe that at her age and with her whole life ahead of her, she actually said such words. For him, it was a big blow. He also understood that these young people had made a mistake. However, he did not understand why only one of them had to bear this time on himself while the other remained in the dark. As Fernando understood that he could no longer remain silent, he replied that he was indeed the girl's doctor. However, he wondered why he suddenly decided to ask about her. He also said that the doctor couldn't just divulge information about the patient unless he was Lady Green's husband or something like that. After that, he began to look closely at Theodore and could not believe that he really did not want marriage with this girl, but still wanted to continue to have fun with her. For some time, the commander of the knights thought about something, and after that, he asked if it was true that he was able to calculate that they had weeks or perhaps even 7. Fernando was sincerely amazed because he did not understand how a man could find out about this. However, she said that everything was true. In fact, he could not even imagine that the lady had already told him that she was pregnant. However, this question took him by surprise, and the man now assumed that since the girl had already told him about it, he believed that he could now speak freely. Well, he still wanted to interfere in their case and couldn't just leave it all like that, so he said that he understood his position perfectly. However, the fact is that the child is already on the way, and you can't just refuse by saying that he doesn't want marriage. And at that moment, Theodore even blushed a little. He turned to Fernando and asked, "Is he really saying that the child really existed?" And at that moment, Fernando became even more angry because he could not believe that the man was simply testing him in this way. And in the end, he simply went and told the secret that he should have kept silent about until the lady herself was ready. In fact, even in childhood, Theodore's nanny told him that the young gentleman's mother could not stand sour things, to such an extent that she didn't even want to touch ripe oranges. However, when she was pregnant with a boy, she only wanted to eat them. The nanny then explained to the boy that pregnant women often wanted sour things, and with a smile on her face asked if it wasn't amazing that one small fact could unite so many lives. She also explained to him then that morning, sickness could be especially severe. The young gentleman's mother could not eat her favorite food and lost a lot of weight precisely because of this. The words of the nanny that were said that day suddenly flashed through the man's head like lightning. Immediately after the girl almost threw up when they put the fish on the table. He knew very well that Caitlin Green loved pickled herring fillets very much, and they said that she absolutely did not like sour all this time. However, that evening, she could not eat her favorite dish and ate oranges, which she could not stand in her life. And at that moment, when the doctor confirmed this information to Theodore, he was stunned. The man could not believe that this was really true. He asked the man again if Caitlin was really pregnant. However, the doctor did not answer for some time. And then suddenly he hit the table with his hand, with such force that even the cup turned over. He started yelling at the gentleman, asking why he said that this could not have happened. He asked Theodore if he really believed that if a man and a woman had contact, Pregnancy was only possible in some cases, if you want it sometime, and not in principle. Theodore was then very surprised by such a violent reaction of the man. However, he said that he was absolutely right and he needed to think about the consequences. And he also took all the blame on himself, understanding the responsibility. He explained that he was simply completely sober that day, and I think he took all the precautions. However, he could not even imagine that something like this could happen. However, the doctor started yelling at him with even more intensity. He said that coitus interruptus is definitely not a reliable form of contraception, and that he should have taken many safety measures in advance, so that he would not end up getting married and having children if he did not want to. The man was really ashamed because he knew all these factors very well, but he did not take this point into account. And after that, he turned to the doctor, asking who told him that he was not ready to take responsibility. Fernando then calmed down a little and said that Caitlin told him that he was not ready, but at that moment Theodore got angry. He also hit the table with his hand and said that she was carrying his child, so of course he was ready to take responsibility. He immediately shouted, asking what kind of idiot could just leave and abandon her. And with a smile on his face, he added that he was definitely not that kind of person, and therefore could never do something like that in his life. However, at that moment, Theodore suddenly stood up from his seat and started to walk away somewhere. Fernando was very surprised and asked where he was going so suddenly. The man in the staff replied that he was going to Green's estate and also told the doctor to finish his tea before leaving, and did not consider him very ignorant. He just really urgently needed to leave. And before Theodore left, he thanked the man for taking such good care of Kate, and also added that they would contact each other again when there was time. Fernando was genuinely amazed at that moment. He sat in silence for a while and looked at the door, not understanding what was wrong with this man. Theodore, meanwhile, ran along the corridors. He was already at the girl's estate and was rushing as quickly as possible to meet her. And at that moment, he began to analyze all their conversations, and now it became clear to him why the girl was talking so actively about marriage and children, although she claimed that she still preferred easy relationships for herself. Indeed, when she started talking about all this, I thought that she was simply testing him in this way. And that's why I said things that I didn't mean at all. In fact, for Fernando, just being with her already made him incredibly happy, and he didn't even think about her questions and tried to quickly answer something so that she would continue talking as quickly as possible. And besides, he didn't understand how he could have found out about her situation if she didn't tell him about it. Of course, if he had known, his answers would have been completely different. At that moment, he felt incredibly sorry for poor Caitlin, because she had suffered alone for many days because of this and could not even share this news with him so that he could be there. The maids that the young gentleman had just run past were very surprised. They couldn't even get a good look at him because he was running so fast that he almost knocked them off their feet. However, one of the maids said that she could see a smile on his face, and because of this, the girls were surprised. A little more, in fact, Theodore was really very happy because this news made him incredibly happy. At that moment, Caitlin was in her bedroom, completely exhausted, trying to talk to the child and understand what she had to do to make him like pickled herring fillets again. But even in spite of everything, this girl understood perfectly well that it was not the child's fault. If she had not begged Theodore to sleep with her that time, none of this would have happened. But the girl quickly interrupted herself on these thoughts and did not understand why it was her fault, because it was all because of that idiot Arson who played with her for many years and could not tell her the truth. She thought that it really was all because of him. However, even despite all this, the very thought that Arson could commit suicide made her head spin, and she felt really bad. She wondered if it was even possible to live with this feeling of guilt all her life. And how could it be a punishment for him if, for the most part, it would be a punishment for her? She thought that Theodore had tried to quietly settle the matter by declaring a deforge, but a duel in a noble estate and not on the battlefield had created a huge scandal, and for this reason had spread everywhere. Caitlin realized that everyone around would gossip about what kind of knight could break the knightly code in such a high place, and she thought about the fact that all this happened only because of this terrible pickled herring. If she had not been served it, then everything would have been fine. She stroked her belly and turned to the baby, saying that she blamed the herring. But in fact, of course, she was talking about him. After all, he was already starting to be picky, and he hadn't even been born yet. She could already imagine what a robber he would be in food after birth. She knew it for sure. That very moment, the door to her room opened and the girl heard a loud crash behind her. This noise occurred because at that very moment her brother came into the room and brought her breakfast and dropped the tray on the ground after hearing what she said. Keitler slowly turned around and greeted her older brother. She couldn't believe that he actually heard all of this. With a trembling voice, he turned to his sister and asked her not to tell him that this was true. At that moment, she was very worried. She didn't know what to do, because she understood perfectly well that he heard and understood everything. After some time, she had to meet her father, to whom Alexander had conveyed everything. He asked if this was really true and that she now had a child. The girl sighed heavily and said that unfortunately it was so. As soon as the man heard this, he immediately began to lose all knowledge. He could not believe that it could even be true. After he finally woke up, he said that first, it was necessary to sort out the main issues. It was necessary to contact the house of Mura, and if this idiot dies, then there will be a real commotion. Alexander bowed immediately and told father that he would do everything after that. He began to leave, but Caitlin looked at him irritably. In fact, she was very angry with her brother. She couldn't believe that he immediately ran to his father, and she thought about the fact that now she could never trust anyone in this world again. After all, everyone only lies. She understood that they were continuing to discuss the situation and thought that it was Arson's child. Therefore, she needed to somehow get out of this situation. Therefore, the girl turned to the father and said that in fact the child's father was not Arson at all. And as soon as the men heard this, they were even more surprised. Her father, hearing this, shouted loudly, asking what she was saying. Having calmed down a bit, he asked who, if not Arson, could be the child's father. At that moment, the girl was really worried. However, the man asked her in a trembling voice not to tell him that she was secretly dating Sir Hurt. He stood up from his seat and was about to do something when suddenly Caitlin replied that he could calm down because it wasn't Theodore Hurd. However, at that moment she suddenly thought about what she had said at all, because she had not intended to lie to him. She had not even spoken to Theodore about all this yet, and she thought about the fact that her father could burst in on him and make an unnecessary scene that she would definitely regret. So she simply had to do it. First, the girl needed to calm her father and Alex. Then she would immediately go to Theodore's estate and then tell him about the child and ask what they needed to do next. She thought that this was a perfect, well-thought-out plan that she had to stick to. However, everything fell apart after the maid came into the room and said that Lord Hurd had just arrived at the estate. The girl could not understand why everything always happened at such an inopportune time. She thought that it was as if it was not obvious who the father of the child was, and he had to appear at exactly that moment when everything was falling apart for her. The Count, as soon as he heard that Lord Hurt had arrived without warning, was very surprised, but Alexander assumed that most likely it was about Arson, because there was so much gossip. Then Father Caitlin said that they should not take him to the living room, but bring him to this room where they were all already gathered. As soon as Theodore entered the room, he immediately got down on one knee and addressed Count Green. He turned to him seriously and said that he had come to officially ask for the hand of his daughter, Lady Green. The man did not even have time to take off his cape. Everything happened so quickly. As soon as Alexander played, they heard this, they were amazed. But as soon as the brother looked at his sister and saw surprise on her face, he immediately asked why she was so scared when she heard this. Of course, Theodore had not planned to go straight to Count Green from the very beginning. However, as soon as he arrived at the estate, Fredrin was already there. He intercepted the man and said that Lady Caitlin was with her father. So he offered to simply accompany him there. Theodore did not object and agreed, and thus the meeting of all four of them began. The Count immediately looked at the commander with skepticism and in an angry voice asked what business had brought him to his residence. Theodore was still very happy. He smiled and said that he had something to say to the Count. The man, hearing this, was a little surprised and immediately asked what exactly. But before he let him answer, he said that if it was about Saramer or DeForge, then he honestly wasn't interested at all. He was sure that the man had his own reasons for all this. Therefore, he wasn't going to interfere. Theodore smiled and said that he really appreciated his trust. However, that day he did not go through this issue at all. Playing a little surprised, he immediately asked what issue he had come for. The man thought about the fact that if he said directly that he came because he found out she was pregnant, he would definitely get angry and ask, did he really not know anything until now? Since he did not take any measures, how did Theodore know that if he said that in such a situation he came to ask for a discharge to look after her, then he could misunderstand the results of the DeForge with Arson, deciding that it was simply a way to eliminate the rival. He knew that there was only one way for Caitlin to understand why he had come, and to show that he fully intended to take responsibility for her. The girl was very tense at that moment. She thought that since this matter was not at all about Arsony, she was afraid to even imagine why he came. And it was at that very moment that he got down on one knee and explained to the Count that he had come to officially ask his daughter for her hand in marriage. Once everything in the room calmed down a bit, Caitlin was seated opposite Theodore, playing. She asked if this really meant that the child's father was Sir Heard, after all. The man decided to sum up the whole situation he had heard and asked his daughter if she had really dated Arson first, and then started dating Sir Heard at the same time. She answered father that this was not at all true. It could not be said that she had a romantic relationship with Arson. The Count, hearing this, said that then it was good and asked if this really meant that she had met with Sviatoslav. The captain sighed heavily and replied that this was also not at all what he thought. And then suddenly the man couldn't take it anymore. He started shouting, asking, "Does this really mean that he didn't even meet his daughter, but simply decided to have fun with her and ultimately even made a child with her?" He started yelling at the man, asking, "Did he really keep calling himself a knight who honors the knightly code? Did he take an innocent girl who didn't even know anything about him?" The man's blood pressure even jumped and he felt a little sick from it. Theodore tried to explain that everything was not so. They may not have been in love, but he never treated his relationship with Lady Green lightly. He really valued this girl and would not let anyone hurt her. Is it worth hearing? This was very shocked. She glanced at the man and thought that he was a real liar. But Theodore continued to speak, saying that if the Count trusted him and was ready to entrust his daughter to him, then he could guarantee that the man would have nothing to worry about. She would be protected. But the Count still remained angry. He asked the man on what grounds he should have trusted him at all when he appeared out of the blue and told him all this news. The men argued among themselves for some time when Caitlin asked her father to calm down. It was more expensive. He suddenly knelt down and said that he could take all his blows until he felt better. He was ready to be beaten. As soon as the Count saw this, he was very shocked. He swung at the guy again. Asked him if he really decided to give in to him, thinking that he was so weak and that he couldn't even beat him when he resisted. He was about to hit the road when suddenly someone ran forward. "Caitlin!" She turned to her father and told him to stop already. The girl explained that she did not understand what he had done wrong at all. Because he had said that he would take responsibility for this reason, she did not understand why father was so angry with him. Of course, Caitlin herself was not delighted with Dor because he caused her trouble. However, she did not want him to be beaten because he really came and declared that he was ready to take responsibility. At that moment, the Count finally gave in. He sat down on the sofa and sighed heavily and said that the people who said that raising children was in vain were indeed right. After all, they still remained just as ungrateful in the end. He told the children to stop arguing in that case and just get ready for the wedding until their stomach became. He also strongly noted that the man simply had to accept this situation as it was. Only Caitlin and Theodore were left alone to conclude a contract. The men in a sad voice asked her how long she was going to hide this from him. The girl replied that he found out anyway, so she thought there was no point in discussing all this. It was good that everything ended well, but she still felt a little guilty, so she asked him for forgiveness for not telling her earlier, and she also added that he really deserved to know this from the very beginning. Then, Kotlet stretched and said that she could finally breathe calmly. Over the last few days, she had been subjected to so much stress that she really couldn't even take full breaths. She was on edge all the time. Then Theodore asked how she felt in general. The girl smiled and said that now she was fine for some time. She really thought that she would die. Theodore then sighed heavily and asked her for forgiveness. The girl, hearing this, immediately smiled and asked since when his speech became so informal. The man replied that very soon they would become husband and wife, so he did not understand how much longer they had to speak officially. Of course, she could also discard formalities. If she wanted to, he did not object. But Caitlin replied that it was completely normal for you, or perhaps she would just do it gradually, since she was still 6 years younger than him, and it could really cause discomfort. Well, Theodore, a little embarrassed, looked away from her and said that from today on he would simply call her Kate. At that moment, the girl did not understand at all why he was talking about such a trifle so seriously, and this caused her some discomfort. Then he decided to offer her an alternative and said that she could do as she wanted and even suggested calling him by his nickname, for example, Terry. But Caitlin didn't like it very much because it sounded more like a dog's name. However, she asked if he liked that nickname at all. As soon as the guy heard this, he immediately said that he really liked it, so they decided to agree on it, and Kate decided to now call him simply Terry. However, the man looked at the piece of paper and ink that lay in front of her and asked why it was needed because he really had no idea. She slowly replied that she was going to make points for their happy family life. The man was very surprised to hear this. He did not expect that she was going to approach this issue so seriously. But Kathleen understood that even though they had gotten into trouble together, it was noble on his part, because he was a man who didn't believe in marriage and children. but he had mustered up the courage to propose to her. So she took the first one in her hands and immediately began to write down the first point. The girl knew that in this whole situation, the greatest attention she could give him was to write that as long as they did not show problems, they would respect each other's freedom and could meet with other people. As soon as Theodore heard this, he was sincerely amazed, and the girl only sat and smiled and looked at him. For a while he was in a stupor, but soon he snatched the piece of paper from her hands and quickly tore it up, since this rule definitely did not suit him. Terry said that apparently a happy family life and I will need Kate was sincerely shocked as soon as she saw that he just took and so brutally tore a sheet of paper. She started yelling at him, asking what his problem was because she was just trying to do something good for them and didn't understand why she had to do it. The man replied that he didn't need it, and therefore asked her not to try to do anything else good. It would be better for her not to move at all, because it was impossible to look at. Kate immediately started yelling at him again. She asked what he was even saying. Was she really an idiot who dreamed of a happy family life with such a difficult and harmful person like him? For some time they shouted and argued among themselves. However, soon everything finally calmed down, and the next day the girl decided to go to the village. She still couldn't feel at peace. Yes, the situation, she couldn't imagine that such an honorable knight could start a childish argument with a young lady. Because of this, she began to worry even more about her future. She was so busy all this time that she couldn't even visit Catherine's house. Mrs. Merrill was on a long vacation at that time, so she assumed that her friend was very lonely because of this. Kate thought that it suited her because she would tell the news about the wedding and spend the night with her friend, so that if something happened, she wouldn't even be afraid. However, as soon as she approached the house, she was very surprised because she saw Arson near the entrance, and this made her very wary. She did not understand what he could possibly be doing there. And at that moment, the girl finally realized that the knights of the Spartan Empire choose death by losing their honor, and she could not believe that Arson made the same decision. That's why he came to Catherine's house just to say goodbye to her. After all, the three of them had always been very close and talked every day. At that moment, Kate was simply horrified. She wondered what would happen if Arson died. He was her savior. She still believed in this story, and if Arson had not saved her, she would not have been able to live for sure. Even her close friend told her so. Then she remembered the whole conversation with her friend, and again wondered about the fact that this man really saved her life. But she could not believe that she now had to become the one who would lead him to death. She even remembered the words of Catherine, who said that Kate could not help but love him. After all, he was her savior, and she could not believe that it was so easy for the girl to push him away. She even thought then that she could leave her too. And so Caitlin realized that she simply had to stop him. It was her duty. If Arson made a decision as a knight, then only she could stop him in this. That's why the girl immediately ran up to him and asked him to stop, because he was already about to go inside. But she didn't even have time to finish her sentence when suddenly, Katrin came out of the house. She immediately looked at Arson. The two of them didn't hear Kate calling him. The girl then reached out to Arson and without thinking twice, kissed him right on the lips, and at that moment Caitlin had horror on her face. She couldn't believe that it was all true, and the man even started kissing the girl back. She even felt sick from this. She was about to vomit from this picture. Without even meeting either her friend or Arson, she returned home very quickly. As soon as the girl ran into the room, she lay down on the bed and cried for a long time. Her maid Amy was already starting to worry, because several hours had already passed since then, and her mistress continued to cry without even changing her clothes. So she brought her food and asked her to calm down and at least have a little snack. But Caitlin continued to cry. She said that if the maid were in her place, then of course she would understand her. The girl also said that in such a situation she definitely could not eat anything. Therefore, she asked everyone to leave her alone. The maid then sat on the edge of the bed and, sighing heavily, said that she had told her from the very beginning that something was wrong with this Catherine. Kate, hearing this, began to cry even more. She really felt incredibly hurt by this. She felt betrayed by them. Meanwhile, Amy continued to reason. She said that Catherine always talked about Arson, and besides, she didn't understand why the girl constantly mentioned saving him. After all, it wasn't Catherine who did it, and therefore the maid didn't understand why she had to constantly praise this man so much. She also said that this happened many years ago, but every time they meet, she always talks about the savior. The maid even suggested that most likely it was just good manipulation and influence on Kate's brain. The maid also replied that she had heard that none of this would have happened if Lady Merrill had not lost her that day. So Amy even thought that perhaps she had praised Lord Moore out of guilt. However, in the end, As it turned out, she was simply brazenly praising her man in front of her mistress, and therefore the maid considered this act to be incredibly impudent and could not believe that the woman actually did this. Kathleen finally calmed down a little. She turned over to her other side and in a tearful voice asked if it was true that they couldn't date for long. The maid, hearing this, became even more angry and asked where the mistress was from. Could she be so confident? After all, no one knows when two people started to feel something for each other and be together. So it cannot be said that this began recently. And at that moment, Caitlin finally realized that the girl Arson loved was probably Catherine. Of course, at first it was a big deal for her. But then she became interested in why Catherine was so desperately trying to get her together with Arson, because it was really suspicious. Count Moore would probably not have approved of Catherine as a commoner and a wife for his only heir. And Catherine probably knew this very well. They had to meet secretly without telling anyone about it, and Kate could not believe that she thought it was better for her beloved to start life with a close friend than a complete stranger. She also thought about what Catherine herself was thinking about at that moment, what plans she was making, and most importantly, what goal she was looking for in all of this. Kate didn't understand at all. However, just as she was about to sit down to eat, a maid entered the room and said that Lord Hurt had arrived. The maid immediately stood up and ran to Lord Hate and tried to stop her. However, it was all useless because Amy was no longer listening to her. At that moment, the door opened and Theodore looked inside. He saw Caitlin sitting on the bed with tear-stained eyes. He immediately asked what happened and why she was suddenly crying. The girl was silent for a while, but then she asked why he spoke to her so informally. The man immediately corrected himself and addressed her more politely. Caitlin replied that she had indeed cried and asked him what had happened. And the man came closer to her and asked if anything had happened to her. The girl looked away from him and said that she didn't want to talk about it at all. But Theodore came closer to her, put his hands on her shoulders and raised her head so that she would look into his eyes. The man asked why Odati wanted to talk about this. Did something serious really happen to her and was it hurting her? At that moment, he immediately got angry and asked if she had somehow already managed to meet Arson, and even suggested that last time he had not made it clear to this man what to do. Caitlin immediately understood that he was serious, and so she said that this was not so at all. Everyone had things that they did not want to talk about, so she asked him not to press her with his scary look. She did not want to tell him anything. She didn't respond to this. He realized that he needed to take the situation into his own hands, so he sat down next to her. Caitlin was genuinely surprised. She couldn't believe that he was really worried about her. It was unexpected for her. There was silence between them for a while. Then his girlfriend asked him why he had come at all. Theodore then looked at her and replied that he thought it would be nice to eat together. He wanted to invite her to his home. At that moment, he reached out to the girl and, brushing the hair from her face, placed his hand on her cheek. Theodore explained that since they would soon be living together, he also wanted to introduce her to the people in his house, because he believed that it was time to do so. But Theodore, get up from your seat. He said that the video of her condition on that day, he understood that this was not the most suitable option, so he added that he would come another day. Caitlin thought about how he came to her house and offered to eat while they were both still angry at each other. She assumed that he probably swallowed his pride and decided to extend an olive branch. So when the man had not yet managed to walk out the door, she agreed to this, saying that she would be happy to go to him to eat. Caitlin herself wondered how long she was going to waste time clinging to her past when she had an exciting, interesting future ahead of her. She had already wasted too many years on Arson, so it was time for her to move on, so she decided to give Theodore a chance. Some time passed, the girl changed her clothes, and together with the man arrived at his estate. As soon as she got out of the carriage, she looked around and was a little surprised. After all, it turned out to be not as big as she thought. When the two of them began to approach the estate, they were met by the butler, who greeted my lady and said that it was a great honor for them to finally meet her in person. Helen introduced himself and Caitlin, smiling happily, said that she was also very pleased to finally meet him, but Theodore was not in such a joyful mood as everyone else around him. The man looked at his butler and immediately told him in a sullen voice to stop smiling at his lady with his eyes. But Helen smiled and said that he couldn't do anything if his eyes were like that by nature. He couldn't just stand there with them closed. They started heading towards the entrance and the men were still talking about something. And Caitlin thought that yes, Dollar was on a friendlier note with the servants than she had expected, and this pleasantly surprised her. As soon as they entered the banquet hall, they were immediately met by an elderly cook. She saw Lady Kate and immediately greeted her, while at the same time the girl put various dishes on the table. She quickly approached Kate and began to lead her to the table, telling her to sit down quickly because she was probably already very hungry. The woman also said that her name is Sonia, and her back, like Lena's, was breaking from cleaning the house with all the men, so she really hopes that if something happens, the girl will understand if something is wrong. Kate immediately sat down and Galen helped her do it and pushed the chair behind her. The girl with a smile on her face thanked him for it. She herself thought about the fact that all this was very strange because the girl thought that she would feel sick from the food. However, everything did not look disgusting at all and even smelled pleasant. Then suddenly, Sonia turned to her and said that she heard that she had severe morning sickness. So she decided to show off her skills that day and really hope that the girls would like everything and it would be delicious. She explained that she was originally from a country called Irvani on the northern continent. There they eat a lot of soft food, and perhaps that is why women rarely suffered from morning sickness because of Chervinia, precisely because of the proper nutrition that was ideal for pregnant women. Sonia turned to Glenn and asked if he could bring the tea she had brewed from the living room. It would have gone perfectly with the Hervan-style salad. He immediately replied that he would do it now. Then the cook turned to the young gentleman and asked him to stop making faces. She had told him that they would not be able to serve meat because of the lady's toxicosis. Well, Theodore was really very unhappy at that moment because he never liked to eat just vegetables and greens. He asked, couldn't they just prepare a separate portion for him so that everyone would be happy? But Sophia yelled at him saying that sometimes even for health you need to eat such products. So she asked him not to be picky. Caitlin immediately laughed when she heard all this. She thought that they were like a mother and son who was complaining about the food. She also thought that it was really unexpected for her to find out that he was so close to his servants and thought that such a role suited him much more than she imagined. When the man had already started eating his dish, Caitlin and Sama decided to try the soup that was prepared for her. As soon as she took the first bite, she couldn't contain her joy, and on her face she immediately told her assistant that it was incredibly delicious, and she really liked it. And smiling happily, she said that she was really happy now that whenever she wanted she could just let me know and she would definitely prepare something similar. As she said that the lady was incredibly cute, she was too small and beautiful to stand next to their young master, so they thought about what they needed to do with her. She asked how she could be so snow white and cute like a bunny. If the baby in her belly looks like Caitlin, then he will be simply charming, and it doesn't matter if it's a boy or a girl. Glenn, meanwhile, placed a cup of tea in front of the lady and asked his partner what would happen if he looked like the gentleman. Sophia thought about it and said that the gentleman was not like that in childhood either. Of all the babies she raised with her own hands, he was one of the cutest. After that, sighing heavily, she said that time was probably very cruel and spared no one. Theodore was very embarrassed at that moment. He asked them to stop saying this and also go and eat. Then, Sophia began to leave and wished them all a pleasant appetite, and also said that they could call if they suddenly needed anything. If she smiled happily and said that she would definitely do it if something happened, she thought about why she had such a warm impression of Sonia and her soft manner of speech. But then she realized that it was most likely because they reminded her of her mother, although they were not similar in appearance at all. If her mother were alive, she would be approximately Sonia's age. Her mother always said that she married the most beloved person in the world, and she was so happy when she gave birth to an even more beautiful Caitlin, and also always said that she hoped that her daughter would be as happy as she was when she grew up. But at that moment, she felt a little sad. She mentally asked her mother for forgiveness because she was already an adult, but had never experienced the love that everyone around her talks about, not to mention marrying the most beloved person in that world. Kathleen was going to marry a complete stranger whom she didn't even know a few months ago. His man, from whom it is difficult to expect feelings like love even after the wedding, is a free man, and even cold. Caitlin was very sad. She thought that it was all very unfair. She didn't understand what was wrong with her, and why she should get married without ever experiencing passionate love that would make her head spin. Even Arson and Katrin had a sweet relationship, and the girl did not understand why she alone could not finally find that very person for herself. Then suddenly Theodore, seeing that she was very sad, turned to her and asked if something was really wrong. The girl, hearing this question, did not answer for some time. She did not understand why her emotions had been so shameless lately, even over little things. At that moment, she suddenly started crying and shouted loudly, saying that she would not get married. The girl even slammed her hands on the table. Theodore, hearing this, was very surprised and immediately asked her to look at him and explain what she was saying, because the girl had already gotten up from the table and started to leave. Well, Caitlin said that she meant exactly what she said. She won't marry him. She feels too sorry for her life to do that. Then Theodore couldn't stand it. He also hit the table with his hands and, turning to her, quickly began to approach her, and in a rough voice he told her to sit down immediately. As soon as Caitlin heard such an address to herself, she immediately asked what was wrong. She did not understand why his mood had changed so abruptly. Then the man took a piece of paper from his pocket and put it on the table. There was a marriage registration document of the Empire. The man asked Lady Green to put her fingerprint there, and then the matter would be finished. The girl immediately began to resist. She tore up the piece of paper again and said that she would not do it. Theodore asked her not to complicate the already complicated situation, but the girl did not want to listen to him. Then he took out many more copies of the same document, since he knew perfectly well that she would tear up the previous one. This angered Caitlin even more. She thought that this man was incredibly meticulous and wondered how many forms for marriage registration he had prepared in advance. Having calmed down a little, Theodore asked why she suddenly started behaving like that. Who else could she marry if not him? Caitlin couldn't believe that at that moment he decided to look down on her. Then she turned away from him and said that she would marry another man. She also said that for his information, she is from a famous family that everyone around knows. She is young, not ugly, and a completely suitable woman for a relationship. As soon as Theodore heard that she started talking about another man, he got angry, grabbed the girl by the waist and said that she was carrying his child. And does she really dare to talk about marrying another man after that? Gitlin was very angry at this terrible, inflexible nightly code of Easter, the fashionable idea that he should take responsibility for the woman who was carrying his child. However, another question was whether he could truly love his wife. It was impossible to expect normal romance from this man Theodore, so Caitlin didn't know what to do. She remained in the man's arms for some time, but after that she pushed him away and began to leave, telling him not to follow her. Theodore yelled at her, saying that she should at least tell her why she started behaving so abruptly. After all, they were sitting there, and nothing like that happened. And she suddenly lost it. Then Caitlin stopped. She realized that she could not stand it any longer and screamed and said that she did not want any marriage without love. As soon as she said this phrase, she immediately ran out the door and Theodore was so shocked that he couldn't even move for a while. So the next day after she ran away from Theodore's house, she met up with her other girlfriends. One of the girlfriends smiled and said that they hadn't seen Lady Green for a long time and added that she should go out more often, and also asked if she had really been so busy all this time that she couldn't even meet them. She said that she was a little embarrassed to talk about it. However, she was busy meeting with a wonderful person. As soon as the girls heard this, they immediately became interested and demanded details. The girl explained that he was a member of the Imperial Knights and that he was Sir Theodore Hurt. Only the girls heard about this. They were amazed because this man was number one among the men people want to marry. He was truly incredible. The girls were so surprised that Caitlin said this that they even asked in one voice if it was really true. Caitlin just sat there and smiled. In fact, she had no intention of calmly showing up at such social gatherings. But if Theodore and she, who had no connection, suddenly got married, there would really be a lot of gossip. So the father wished that she would come and little by little begin to prepare the ground so that in the end neither the girl nor Theodore would suffer. The girl, who was the daughter of a viscount and had the nickname of Winged Gossips, said that now he was the most desirable man in the capital. She immediately became interested in how they met, and of course she wanted to hear all the details. Kate explained that it happened through her older brother, and then one thing followed another, and that's how the circumstances came together. Yes, another noble lady said that she heard about how many young ladies had their eyes on him, so it turns out that it was because of Lady Green that he did not look at anyone else and did not choose. Kathleen thought that the truth was that he wasn't that great, and she didn't even know if they would get married or not, but for the sake of trying for her father, she had to lie outright. This left quite a bitter taste in her mouth. But then suddenly the girl turned to Lady Green and asked if she had already settled those strange affairs with Sir Moore. After all, they had heard that they had met. Another lady with brown hair asked what was there to settle anyway. Lady Green had already suffered enough. Therefore, she had had enough of this man in her life. Her friend agreed and said that there was nothing to settle. Did Lady Everloyd really decide to pretend as if she didn't know how much Lady Green suffered in that relationship? The girl also said that she kept quiet because Lady Green said that she liked him, but watching it from the outside was even more annoying. She also asked if everyone remembered that time when her daughter was walking. She contacted him to ask if he could pick her up, but he simply sent an empty carriage for her and didn't even come. The girl with the blonde hair said that he really thought that she asked him because she didn't have a carriage. She didn't understand how anyone could be so insensitive and unintelligent. It was very rude of him to do that. Then she remembered that awkward moment that she would have preferred to forget. But the girls decided to remind her of it. But that was not all. One of the girls asked Lady Green what she thought about the meeting of knights that had recently taken place at the estate of Count Green. She heard that Sir Hurd volunteered to fight Ford and won. She asked what happened there in detail. There are various rumors in the capital, but she would like to know the truth. Caitlin continued to sit silently. She was actually waiting for this topic to finally come up. The other lady agreed. The previous one said that she was dying of curiosity, and now she assumed that this was just a love quarrel from the lady. Then put it in a cup of tea and said that nothing special or like that happened. Therefore, they should not worry so much. But the aristocrats asked what it was then. Caitlin laughed and answered that she herself didn't really know. And forts, in essence, are a way to cover up a knight who violated the code of chivalry. She heard that sticking one's nose into all this was considered very ignorant, so she couldn't tell them since she herself didn't know the details. The ladies, having heard about this, were very upset, but said that they understood everything. Caitlin decided to change the subject from this awkward atmosphere and said that she did not see Lady Blank at their meeting and asked if something had happened. How could she have assumed that she had not been greeted? She remembered how the girl had not appeared in the salon for a long time last time, and this made her wary. The aristocrats glanced at each other and said that apparently the girl had not heard the rumors that were going around, and Caitlin immediately became interested, asking what rumors exactly were being discussed. Then, the lady with red hair said in a quiet voice that Lady Blank was pregnant, and as soon as the girl heard this, she even choked on the tea she was drinking at that moment. She immediately asked if this was true, and the girl said that she had completely hidden in her personal estate in order to hide it. But Lady Hindley accidentally saw her walking the other day and said that her belly was already visible. Yes, I agreed with my friend and said that when they called out to her, she flinched and even got upset. And judging by the fact that she didn't say who her lover was, despite questions, it was probably the one who must not be named. She said that she would have to give birth and raise the child alone, so they assumed that she was just crazy. Caitlin immediately asked if they really didn't know who the father was. The aristocrat replied that of course only Lady Bailang knew, but she couldn't say, probably because he simply abandoned her, and that's why she didn't want to embarrass herself even more. She also said that she should have known that if a man is a respected noble, then he will definitely not be serious with her. After all, no one would seriously date the daughter of a minor noble family just by rank. The other lady agreed and said that she was still glad that she would not have to see Lady Blank anymore, even though she honestly did not fit their group standards, and therefore it was even better this way. But another lady said that she only ended up in this place because she came to the salon and became friends with Lady Green, so they assumed that she was also just lucky. The girls then could not stop. They discussed this situation, that she was pregnant not recklessly, but the father fled. Perhaps he was the son of a famous noble family and she became pregnant specifically in order to change her fate. However, the girls did not understand what a stupid action this was. After all, they did not know how she could prove that the child was his. They did not understand at all what she believed and hoped for. After all, such an act was a disgrace for all women. Caitlin, who was sitting and listening to all this, was amazed. She put her cup on the table and asked, did they really think that believing him was a big mistake? Then she laughed at the phrases they said about how she wanted to change her fate and said that they knew perfectly well that Lady Blank was not like that, and they were too strict with her. She stood up from her seat and asked, can't they even feel sorry for her? But instead, they spread dirty rumors and talked behind her back about how she slept with anyone. These conversations made her wonder if they were women at all. And as soon as the girl with red hair heard this, she immediately became worried. She ran up to Lady Green and said that they didn't mean that at all. But the girl didn't care. She said that they should learn to distinguish what can be said and what can't. That's why there are rumors that everyone laughs at the noblewomen who held meetings in the salon. She asked them to stop saying these awkward things about her small family, and she was ashamed to listen to all this. All these ladies talk so much about the goal of wisdom as a virtue of a woman, but apparently they did not understand that discrimination by status is a violation of noble virtues. The girl asked Lady Green to stop and said that it was not at all what she thought. But of course the catling went on. She said that apparently she also does not correspond to these standards that they have come up with for themselves, so she will no longer be able to come to them for some time. How she told the girls to take care of themselves and especially their long tongues, and after that she left without stopping even though everyone asked her to stay. As soon as Caitlin went outside, that is, she immediately felt a little better. However, she kept thinking about this situation and thought about the fact that this is all because it seems to her that this is not someone else's problem. She really couldn't contain her emotions at all. And if Theodore hadn't proposed to her, then the one the young ladies would have been gossiping about could have been her and not Sylvia Blanc. Because of this, the girl was incredibly sad. And then suddenly, standing at the top, she saw Theodore standing not far from her, waiting for someone. She was very surprised and, coming closer to him, asked if it was really he, the man, who immediately turned around and, seeing her, smiled. They walked together. Caitlin asked how he even knew that she was there. The man replied that he was at the Count's estate, and they told him that she was there. That's why he came. He definitely couldn't read minds, he just recognized her. Then Theodore decided to talk about exactly what they were talking about last time. Kathleen immediately asked if she understood correctly that he wanted to talk, that she did not want a marriage without love. The man immediately said that this is exactly what he wanted to talk about, and also to find out what exactly she meant. He needed a specific answer. But Caitlin answered in a calm voice that what she said was exactly what she meant. She didn't want to be a spouse without love. And if she has to get married, she would like to date a man who could love her and get married, nurturing this love in the future. Caitlin said that she knew perfectly well that it might sound very childish, but that was what she really wanted. Seeing his serious expression, she explained that she had thought too much that evening and was upset because of this and said too much, so she asked him to forget about it. But Theodore, blushing a little, quietly plucked up his courage and asked the girl if she would like to try dating him. The girl, hearing about this, immediately froze in place. She looked at him in surprise and asked him to explain what he meant. Then, Theodore replied that as she said, since they needed to get married anyway and if she needed this love, then it was quite logical that she should try dating him first. Caitlin immediately wondered about his conditions regarding free love and their cold relationship. But she seriously thought about this proposal and said that of course it had its sense, however. She decided to clarify whether he really just said that he could love her. Theodore was very angry that she did not understand the whole point that he was trying to convey to her, and asked what she had been listening to all this time. But having calmed down a little, he said that it seemed to him that he had been saying all the time that he wanted to get to know her better, and his feelings really had not changed after that news. Of course, the order is a little reversed. However, he didn't see any problems with this because the result should have been the same anyway. And Caitlin blushed all over when she heard these words. The girl was incredibly embarrassed. She asked if he was really ready to date her and also clarified if it was true that while they were dating and getting to know each other better, he would not go on dates with other girls. She even actually compiled the points of a happy marriage specifically for him so that he would be comfortable in it. But then suddenly, Theodore shouted at her, saying that he was actually a knight. He asked if she really thought that he would make a scandal when he already had a wife. Therefore, he didn't need her terrible marriage clauses or anything else. However, he warned Caitlin that she also could not meet with others. The girl replied that she was not going to. After all, this point was only for his benefit, so that he would be comfortable in their relationship. It was hard to sigh. Theodore said that she was already starting to really irritate him, and Caitlin was surprised that he even said that. It hurt her a little. But when the girl looked at this man who hates his brother and children but calls the word love, considering the fact that one day he offered to be just partners, it was strange for her. Caitlin even suggested that he only said it because he knew how much she wanted to try dating at least once. Of course, this was not the answer she was expecting. But the girl assumed that Terry was actually better than she had assumed, and so she decided to give it a try. As soon as she returned back to the estate, she decided to talk about all this with her maid Emma. And beaming with joy, she said that this was her very first boyfriend in her life for her. It was very exciting. The maid then replied that my lady could believe her, because Sir Hurd was the best man on whom one could definitely rely, so she could not worry. Caitlin wondered if she could really believe her words. Amy was a little upset by this, and she asked if the girl still didn't trust her, and also if she had ever met a person with a better sense than hers. Then the girl immediately asked her for forgiveness and said that of course she trusted her. After that, they both laughed. Then Caitlin noticed all these letters and papers that were lying on the small table and asked the maid what it was all about. Amy explained that these were welcome letters from trading companies. Madame Marielle asked her to select only those with whom they would continue to work. Caitlin immediately remembered this because she had already heard it mentioned once and asked if it was true that Madame Merrill was supposed to return very soon. She said that this is exactly how it is, and a few days later, laughing a little, she said that she really needed to finish sorting as soon as possible because she had been talking so much with the lady that she had even lost track of time. Caitlin knew that as the new year approached, the trading company that worked with their family sent letters of thanks, and they responded only to those with whom they wanted to continue cooperation. Previously, this was done by her mother, but after her death, it passed directly to Madame Merrill. Caitlin knew that this was not an easy job and asked if Amy needed help. She had already grabbed one of the envelopes, and the maid only asked if my lady even knew where they got the food from. She also asked if the girl knew where they bought the kitchenware. Caitlin replied that in fact she had no idea. She was just bored, and for this reason she wanted to help. Amy smiled and said that she thought so, but she still allowed the lady to sort through several letters because she thought that it could not hurt. Having looked through several letters, she noticed that there really were a lot of these trading companies of character. But then she saw one rather interesting store that interested her. Instead of the company name, there was simply someone's name written there. It was written that the person was waiting for an answer and also that they had not seen each other for a long time and therefore offered to resume business. Caitlin was very angry when she heard this and did not understand who could write New Year's greeting letters like that. She wanted to immediately terminate the contract with them. She decided to double-check the information with Amy and asked if this was actually a real business. The maid, after examining this letter, said that she did not know what it was, so she assumed that it was simply a supplier of herbs, those with whom they worked when Madame was still alive. And she explained that some people still thought that she was alive, and therefore continued to send letters to Caitlin. Then she replied that she understood everything and felt a little sad from the memories of her mother. In fact, when she was still alive, her mother was heavily dependent on medications. Her father insisted that she try all possible herbs and mixtures, and Madame Moril ordered rare and expensive drugs from everywhere. But since her mother was no longer alive, Caitlin said that in that case they didn't need these traders. Emma said that everything is correct and asked you to give her this letter. She will collect and throw them all away. That same evening, Arson sat in his dark room, weighed down by thoughts and memories of Catherine. During his last visit where the towers were and their kiss, the girl told him not to be weak because he was the only one who could break her. Catherine then said that if Arson was not Caitlin's man, then she would never have been able to love him. So the girl simply easily manipulated the poor guy. And soon Arson convinced himself of this thought and realized that in the end everything should be this way. This place belonged only to him, and he should never have said that to Caitlin. That night in the Tavern of the Han, otherwise everything would have been as it should be. He thought that a few sweet words would make Caitlin come back as if nothing had happened. However, something incredibly changed the girl and her thinking in general. For this reason, it was difficult for the man to understand what exactly happened and why she could not return to him as he expected. Then the guy thought about Theodore Hurt. This is just a boss with whom he maintained warm relations. A person in general was in no way connected with Caitlin. However, that day at the formation, he said that if Arson touched this girl again, he would cut off everything for him so that he could never do anything again. Therefore, Arson realized that it was not just a knight who warned him to stop pestering the lady. The man could not understand at all when the two of them had managed to start having some kind of close relationship between themselves. This upset him very much, because now everything had gone wrong. When some time had passed since then, Catherine decided to come to Caitlin's estate and meet her. Before she even managed to enter the estate, the Count met her on the street. Upon seeing Catherine, he immediately smiled happily and said that they had not seen each other for a long time. He also asked if Marie wasn't supposed to return until tomorrow and suggested that they throw her a dinner in honor of her return. The girl smiled happily and answered something. But in fact, she was very unhappy. Talking to this man was even disgusting to her. She didn't understand how it was possible to throw a banquet just because a maid was returning for others. It could certainly look like generosity and kindness. But in reality, he was just trying to cover up the shame of his wife and daughter. Therefore, Catherine, smiling happily, said that unfortunately she would not be able to do this because she would go home and prepare everything for her mother's return. Because after the trip, she would be very tired and would not be able to do anything. The man was a little upset and said that Mary would come to their estate anyway, so he asked if she would like to stay with Kate. He also called his daughter a troublemaker and said that she would probably have something to tell her best friend. As soon as Catherine heard this, she immediately became wary and asked what she had already managed to do. She herself thought that if he was going to show only half-hearted affection, it would be better if he did nothing at all. However, the Count told the girl to ask Kate some, because she was probably waiting impatiently to talk her to death with all her news. As soon as Catherine heard this, she was a little upset. She thought that if this was all real, then she definitely would not feel so sorry for herself. She would not have experienced this terrible desire for revenge that completely consumed her being, and because of which she had to constantly pretend. However, Catherine said that in that case she would go to Kate's room and she would do everything on her own. It was time to ask. The Count wished them a pleasant time and good luck. Then the girl went towards the estate and thought about the shame she felt looking at Caitlin, the honorable daughter. One day, her mother told her that she felt the same when she looked at the Count and Countess. However, she found her own way to overcome this sadness and shame. As soon as Catherine approached the door to Caitlin's room, she heard conversations about the girl not knowing what dress to wear for the second half of the banquet. In fact, the girl was going to take revenge on the Count in her own way, and she wanted to do it in the near future. At that moment, Catherine opened the door and went inside. She greeted Caitlin. The girl, seeing her friend, was at first a little surprised because she came in without even knocking, and because of this, she was a little scared. Well, when she saw her, she immediately became very unhappy and said that it would have been better for her to wait outside. Catherine, hearing this, was very surprised. She did not understand why the girl suddenly told her this. After all, something like this had never happened before. Meanwhile, Caitlin herself continued to choose jewelry and dresses. She asked Amy which one would go best with her red velvet dress. The maid said that both necklaces were beautiful, but she asked what she thought about the ruby, because she thought it was better than the pearl. Then Caitlin decided to choose ruby, and Catherine at that time stood behind and could not understand at all what was going on with the girl. Usually, as soon as she wrote to her, Caitlin would already run out, even barefoot, to meet. But now she didn't even pay any attention to her and told her to stay outside. Still, Catherine couldn't stand it. She came closer to Kate and said that she came to talk about Arson. The girl, hearing this, immediately became wary and asked what exactly she wanted to talk to her about. However, she didn't even let her get a word in because she said that before, that she also had something she wanted to tell Catherine. She came closer to her friend and handed over a small envelope that was sealed, smiling. She also said that she was going to get married. As soon as the girl heard this, she was very shocked. She quickly snatched the envelope from her friend's hands and began to ask what this even meant. Caitlin said in a completely calm voice that she herself knew that Dora Herta was not in the city now. There was no more famous person in the empire than him. She explained that she had not planned to rush into marriage at all. However, he wanted to marry her so much that she simply had no choice. Catherine was simply horrified by all this. She started yelling at her friend and said that she couldn't do that. This loud scream even scared Caitlin a little. She immediately turned to her friend and asked why she was screaming like that. The girl lowered her voice a little and said that she was just in shock now and also asked what all this meant. They hadn't seen each other for a long time and she didn't understand why she hadn't told her about what was happening the last time. Caitlin was silent for a while, but after that she got a very stern look and said that now he was telling her, so she didn't see any problems. Her friend was completely horrified. She didn't even have anything to say because she had never seen such behavior from Kate in her life. But the girl in turn said that compared to her, who was silent until they started asking questions, Caitlin, although it was late, speaks. So she believed that her method was much better than her friend's. So she did not see any problems. Catherine, hearing that she was hinting to the girl that she had been silent until they started asking questions, did not immediately understand. She had so many different secrets that she hid from Caitlin. So the girl did not understand at all what she was talking about this time. A whole day passed since then, and finally, her mother returned to the frame. The girl was furious. She told her all this news and simply did not know what to do. In order for Katrin to be so zlata, she even broke a glass. Her mother hugged her and began to feel sorry for her. Meanwhile, Katrin asked her what she should do now because she did not understand. The girl said through tears that everything she had prepared was now completely useless. Therefore, she was in despair. Well, then suddenly her mother asked, "What does it mean that she doesn't know?" And at that moment she hit her daughter quite hard on the cheek. She asked if her mother hadn't told her that she felt sorry for herself. Didn't she feel sorry for her mother who couldn't call him her husband? Her mother was furious. She kept asking, didn't she hate this woman who took her mother's place? Didn't she feel sorry that her mother had to struggle to raise her only daughter alone? She didn't say how unfair it was to be near her father without having the right to call him father. Her mother told Catherine that she had said all this too, and asked if it was true that she had been in incredible pain before. She said that her father was alive and well and she didn't need anything. However, in public she was considered a girl without a father. Her mother suddenly began to console her daughter and said that she herself had said many times that this was unbearably difficult for her. After that, she suddenly grabbed her by the hair and said that Kate was incredibly similar to him and did not understand why her daughter did not have a drop of resemblance to his appearance. Catherine then felt incredible pain. She continued to cry, but of course she could not contradict her mother. Soon the woman finally calmed down and hugged her daughter and asked her for forgiveness. The woman said that until now, she had been ruining her life and they agreed that she would definitely pay for it. So the woman told her to do it, because she had promised. Catherine then nervously laughed and told her mother that of course she would do it for her. So there was no need to worry. She would definitely come up with something. In the end, the entire Spartan Empire was all in rumors. The first topic, of course, was about the only heir to the county of Moor, Arson. The deforge that was arranged at the estate of the County of Green by the commander-in-chief of the Imperial Knights, Theodore, was not at all an act of forgiveness for the subordinate. Of course, everyone around was interested in what really caused the commander to take such a step and what happened in the Green estate. According to rumors that spread very quickly, many people considered the reasons for the defort and went siped, and were also curious about how Arson Moor, who had lost his knightly honor, would decide his fate. At that time, the news of the wedding of the century, even more exciting capital, spread everywhere. Also the noble and ancient family of the empire, precious daughter of slavery Green Caitlin, and the man who was considered the best man of the empire. Everyone around learned that Caitlin was supposed to marry the head commander of the Imperial Knights, Theodore, and that they had already officially announced the wedding. Of course, people were actively interested in their love story, and naturally conversations arose about Arson Moor, who almost became the son-in-law of the greenhouse. Thus, through chatty tongues or gossip lovers, very absurd rumors spread that the deforge between Theodore and Arson was not for knightly honor or the ideals of the chevalier, but for the youngest daughter of the County of Green, Caitlin, and was a personal duel. Those who knew even a little about the knightly spirit would laugh at these rumors and of course forget. However, how could ordinary residents of the capital of the empire figure everything out? For this reason, they simply believed everything they were told. Theodore became a dishonest boss who humiliated a subordinate for the sake of his fiancé, and Arsène became an unhappy man who lost his beloved for no reason and was pushed to commit suicide. Ultimately, the main beneficiary of these rumors that seemed to become fact was Arson. So the knights were also outraged as soon as they heard about all this. Alexandra's friends who were sitting next to him asked what he thought about himself, walking around so calmly. And besides, he didn't come alone. He really considered Arson to be an impudent person. If these rumors saved him from committing suicide, he doubted that he would have stayed at home and not dragged himself to the training ground. And he even dragged Katrin along with him. The guy was really furious and didn't understand what he was even thinking about, because while Arson was training, the girl was sitting behind him and watching him with a smile on her face, without even looking away. The knights, as soon as they looked at Catherine, said that she was really beautiful. It took their breath away, and together they looked pretty good. Well, they were still interested in what kind of relationship this girl had with Arson, because very little time had passed since the breakup with Lady Green, and they could not believe that he already had a new woman. Alexander, who didn't like this whole topic of conversation at all, still said that they were probably just acquaintances, and there was nothing like that between them. However, at that moment, Commander Theodore suddenly approached him, smiled, immediately turned to the man and asked what they were doing there. Alexander thought a little about what to answer. However, he said that the training was over and he was about to return to the estate, but before that he took a little rest. Then Alexander hinted that Arson Theodore was also on the training ground and understood everything, and without words, he explained that he expected something like this. So he didn't have to worry about it at all. He gave the guy a small box and said that since he was now heading to the estate, he asked the man to give this small gift to Kate. Alexander was very surprised. He did not expect that Dor would want to convey something, so he immediately asked what it was. But Theodore took a small piece of paper from his pocket and said that it was a new Montpen Castella from the Chocolate Bonbon Bakery, which was located on a special street. Caitlin asked him to buy a dessert there, and he did. He explained that she had said that she had wanted to try it there for a long time. However, if he finished training, it would be too late to take it to her. And since Alexander was already on his way home, it was very convenient for him. The man immediately said that in that case he would of course pass it on, but at that moment Katrin suddenly started approaching him and addressed him. Alex tried to be as friendly as possible. He greeted her and asked if she was interested in watching their training at all. The girl smiled and said that she really liked it. However, she looked at Theodore and asked who this young man was who was standing next to him. Alexander immediately said that this was their commander and Kate's fiancé. Catherine then immediately began to fix her hair because of the giggles and asked if he really was her fiancé, since she had heard so much about him but had never seen him before. But after that, looking him straight in the eyes, she said that it was wonderful that they crossed paths because she just wanted to meet him. She also asked if it would be impudent if he spent a little time with her, since she wanted to talk to him. The girl also said that her name was Katrin, and they had been best friends since childhood. She was very sorry that because of the wedding chores, she couldn't officially introduce them. But she was glad that they at least met like this. As soon as Theodore heard that she was his wife's friend, he simply beamed with joy, because he really wanted to know as much as possible about the girl and her friends. It was ideal. To do this, he bowed, kissed her hand, and said that his name was Theodore and that he was pleased to meet her. The girl said that she was also very pleased after that. She asked if he would mind if he drank tea with her. The man immediately became wary and asked what the occasion was. She decided to meet him like this informally. Catherine smiled and replied that it was nothing special. It was just that Kate was like her soulmate, and she wanted to know how good a person Theodore, as her lover, was. In the end, they still went to the gazebo, which was located not far from the training field. Katrin replied that she had never been to the palace, and if it weren't for her brother Arson, she wouldn't have been able to dream of going there. No one cared as much as Arson. After that, she giggled and said that Kate really loved him with all her soul, just as he loved her. At that moment, he was incredibly shocked. He did not understand why he had to listen to all this. However, the girl, seeing his expression, immediately said that it was impolite to say that. So after asking for forgiveness, she said that she simply did not think, and also that she was very sorry. Theodore said that there was nothing to worry about. Then the girl replied that he didn't need to worry anyway. After all, when she went to get an invitation to the wedding, it seemed to her that Kate loved him very much. It was the first time she saw a girl smile like that and talk about someone other than Arson. Theodore, hearing this, immediately smiled. Of course, he didn't believe it all, because she screamed that she wanted to try dating only, and knew that she was counting the days. But in fact, she didn't even treat him as a lover, so these words from a girl were dubious for him. However, they still see how she said something nice to lift the mood. It was nice, so he assumed that Kate ultimately chose a good friend for herself who could support her. The man decided to find out a little more about this girl and asked how she and Kate became friends, because he was really interested. Catherine explained that her mother had been working at the Green County estate for several years. She served there. And since Kate was from such a noble family, everyone around was surprised how they communicated with her so closely and without ceremony at all. But the two of them were comfortable. Then she replied that as a child she did not understand this at all. The Count and Countess, brother Alex and Kate, treated her so well, and only when she grew up did she understand how valuable it was for her. Now Theodore remembered that she also communicated with her maid as with a friend. And besides, when Kate was in the estate, she was immediately able to find a common language with Sonia and Glenn. Caitlin really was not at all like a typical earl's daughter. And this made him even more pleased. He smiled, just thinking about this girl. Then she changed the subject of the conversation and said that she and her brother Arson met at the age of 12. She didn't know if Theodore had heard. However, Arson once saved Kate's life. During the night's patrol, he found Kate unconscious, and when he safely returned the girl, the Count was beside himself with joy. Of course, she was also incredibly grateful to him for this. It was precisely after this happened that the three of them became incredibly close to each other, and a true friendship was born. Theodore turned to Miss Bennington and said that apparently he and Kate grew up almost like sisters. The girl at that moment giggled and said that this was why she was sometimes tactless. One day, Arson invited the two of them to a country house in Moore County. She laughed again and said that all this was very stupid. They should have thought about it and left them alone, but she decided to go with them anyway. Catherine said that Kate didn't answer her back then. However, she thinks that the girl was a little angry with her because she always wanted to be closer to the man. She also said that after returning, the girl was angry with her for a whole week. Of course, Catherine then did not go with them when they walked together, because she understood that they needed this space. Theodore continued to keep an impassive expression on his face, although he didn't like all this at all. And he himself wondered whether she really did constantly and involuntarily commit such acts. Even now this was happening. Meanwhile, Catherine continued to speak. She said that the county had many country houses in different places, and they often went away together for several days. After that, he interrupted her and said that he actually didn't really want to hear about Lord Moore, and if it wouldn't be impolite, then he would like to talk about something else. At that moment, his voice sounded quite harsh because he really didn't like all of this. Catherine pretended to be very ashamed. She asked him for forgiveness and said that she really didn't think. She just had so many memories of the three of them being incredibly close, and she couldn't control herself. The man replied that there was nothing wrong with it, so she could not change. However, he also said that he simply was not the kind of person who could calmly listen to Kate's ex-lover, so he asked her to stop. The girl replied that in fact she had only mentioned Arson all the time because she had a separate request for the man that she wanted him to fulfill. She immediately asked what kind of request this was, and the cadre replied that she had heard that there had been a deforge at the Green County estate. She didn't know why, but because of his decision, Arson was suffering greatly, so she looked at him with a pitiful look and asked if he could somehow show leniency to this whole situation. The girl said that it was not only her desire, but also Kate's desire because of various rumors and reputations. She cannot openly tell Theodore about it, but she really wanted it. Theodore was very serious. He asked the girl how she could be sure that this was what Kate wanted, because he didn't believe her at all.